My name is Fran, and I've been married for a little over a year. I've worked hard to gain my mother-in-law's approval, but it seems all my efforts were wasted. The reason is simple. One day, she came up to me and said something shocking. I'm returning you to your parents. I was stunned, but before I knew it, my mother-in-law was driving me to my parents' house. Luckily, my parents live close by, only a few minutes away by car. When we arrived, my mother-in-law shouted out of the car, "Hey, come on out." Inside, I heard a thump as my dad quickly came to the door. "How can I help you?" he asked politely, with a smile. "I'm sorry," my mother-in-law replied, "but I need to talk to you." My dad invited her inside, but she refused, saying, "We can talk here. I'm only here to give your useless daughter back." Useless daughter? My dad's face turned serious as he looked at her, clearly upset. "What do you mean by useless?" he asked. "Exactly what I said," my mother-in-law snapped. "Your daughter makes only $5,500 a month. She's not helpful around the house, a defective wife." My dad's face darkened, and I feared he might lose his temper, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to notice and kept insulting me as if nothing was wrong. "She's useless around the house and barely makes any money. We're returning her to you," she said. Just then, my mom stepped outside, curious about the noise. My mother-in-law ignored her, saying only to my dad, "I'm returning her, so it's your responsibility to take her back." My dad looked at my mom, and they exchanged a silent look. Then he turned to my in-laws and said, "Fine, if you're returning her, we'll take responsibility." "That's right," my mother-in-law declared, "take responsibility." "Well, that means closing the company," my dad said calmly. My mother-in-law's eyes went wide. "Wait, what? Closing what company?" "The family business," my dad said firmly. "Since you're making us take responsibility for our daughter, we'll handle things our way." I watched my dad, knowing how serious he was. When he made a promise, he always followed through, no matter how hard it was. I knew he'd keep his word, especially when it came to me, because he's always been devoted to me. His devotion started in my childhood. I was very weak and sickly, getting fevers and needing to stay in bed often. Sometimes, I'd be too sick to go to school for weeks, so my mom would stay by my side, and my dad would be too worried to work. This happened often, and I think it made my parents even more protective of me. Even though I was frail, my parents did their best to make me happy. They filled my room with books, video games, and other things to keep me occupied. My older brother was even a bit jealous of all the attention and gifts I got. I was the only one in the family who got so many things to keep me entertained. My favorite was my dad's old laptop, which he used for work. Since it was secondhand, it might not have been the best for a regular user, but as an elementary school kid, it was perfect. I could draw, play games, and even go online to explore the world. Spending most of my time in bed, the computer opened up a whole new world to me. There was so much out there that I'd never seen before. I thought, maybe I can make my own world here. It's a memory that still makes me smile. That's how my interest in computers began. At first, I just drew simple pictures, but soon I got into computer graphics and was fascinated by 3D designs. I kept learning and improving my skills until I eventually became a graphic designer. Even though I was physically weak, I realized that I could do this kind of work from home. After high school, I started working as a graphic designer from my bedroom, but at first, it was tough. I was self-taught, had no specialized training, and didn't know how to find clients. My health made it hard to work a regular job, so I had to take on projects that I could handle at my own pace. I spent countless hours researching online, putting in effort day after day. Over time, people began to notice my work. Some clients would return or introduce me to new clients, and my work gradually started feeling like a real job. 5 years passed, and as my work became more popular, I felt a huge sense of relief. Around that time, my dad came to me with a proposal. "Would you like to create an ad for a construction company?" The offer surprised me. My dad owns a small construction company that used to focus on building new houses, but now mainly handles home remodeling. The company is small, just my dad, mom, and brother, but it's well known in the neighborhood. "Are you sure you want me to do it? Will I get paid?" I asked. "I'm not asking just because you're my daughter. I believe you have a great eye for advertising," he said. I felt proud to be recognized for my design skills, but more than that, I felt truly accepted. I created an ad that was printed in the local newspaper, and I also built a simple website for the company and posted the ad there. We weren't known outside the area, but locals started noticing. Some would even say, "I saw your ad. It's really nice." Hearing that made me so happy. Later, the ad was turned into a poster, which was displayed at the company's entrance and on bulletin boards maintained by the local community association. I felt proud and thrilled that I could finally support myself and live independently. My posters had become popular in the community, and people began talking about me. Did you know the daughter of the construction company is a designer? She even makes ads for her family's business. These kinds of comments spread, and before long, locals started asking for my help. One day, an electrician from town approached my dad and asked if I could create an ad for his business. My dad said with a smile, "I'll ask Fran." This electrician was actually one of my dad's clients. His company handled everything from air conditioner installations to fiber optic lines and wiring. We often worked together on remodeling projects, so I was happy to help. I designed the ad and asked my dad to deliver it when it was ready. The electrician loved it and was so pleased that he even came to our house to thank me with a small, sweetly wrapped gift. But it wasn't the electrician I was used to, it was his son, Clark, who had come. He introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Clark. My father's the electrician." Clark had recently graduated from college and was helping his dad with the family business. "So, are you planning to become an electrician too?" I asked him one day, curious about his plans for the future. He chuckled and nodded. "Yeah, I think so. I'll probably take over the family business one day," he said, looking at me with a warm smile. "Guess that means we'll be seeing a lot of each other." His eyes held a hint of something more, and before I knew it, I was blushing. Then he added, "Not that I'd mind. I think you're pretty amazing." No one had ever said anything like that to me before, and I was both flustered and thrilled. We exchanged phone numbers, but this time, it was for us, not for any business. That night, I was so nervous and excited that I barely slept. After that, Clark and I started talking every day. We shared our routines, funny stories, and dreams, and those conversations quickly became my favorite part of each day. We soon started dating, though it wasn't always easy, since I often wasn't well enough to go far. Our dates were simple, short walks to the nearby park when I felt up to it, where we'd chat and laugh together. We didn't get to do the typical things, like going to a movie or having a long night out, and with Clark's busy schedule as an electrician, our plans were always subject to his work hours, especially during the peak seasons of summer and winter, but we made it work, staying close through our texts and calls, and our bond deepened with time. Eventually, we decided to get married, and a few years later, I moved in with Clark and his family. In the beginning, it felt like everything was falling into place. Clark's parents seemed understanding. My mother-in-law told me, "Just do what housework you can handle," and my father-in-law was considerate, only asking me for small favors when I had time. I truly thought we were going to have a warm, cooperative life together. But gradually, things shifted. One day, my mother-in-law asked, "Can you watch the store for me while I'm away?" I explained that I had my own work, but she insisted, "Just bring your laptop, you can work from the counter." Wanting to be helpful, I agreed, even though it took away time from my job. Soon, my father-in-law was asking if I could design a website for the store. "I'm not a professional," I said, but he assured me I'd be fine, so I took on that project, too, even though web design wasn't my strength. As weeks went by, the requests kept coming. My mother-in-law began expecting me to handle all the cleaning, cooking, and laundry. Running the store also became a regular part of my day. With each new responsibility, my graphic design work suffered, and my income dwindled. But since Clark was covering our expenses, I tried not to let it bother me. Even so, the stress wore me down. I was constantly exhausted and even started getting sick. One day, when I was too weak to get out of bed, I told my mother-in-law I needed a break. She looked at me and scoffed. "A fever? Just over this?" But she then sighed and told me to rest. I worried I might have offended her by refusing to work. Later, when Clark came to check on me, I explained everything, hoping he'd understand. He looked at me and said, "Why don't you just say no if it's too much?" I was stunned. "They're my in-laws, Clark. I can't just refuse," I explained, worried they'd resent me or even suggest a divorce if I did. But he only said, "You're an adult, you have to stand up for yourself," leaving me feeling even more alone. When I recovered, I continued doing as my in-laws asked, hoping my efforts would eventually earn their approval. One day, my mother-in-law suddenly asked, "Fran, how's your work going?" Thinking she was just making conversation, I told her I was still managing, though at a slower pace. She then asked, "How much are you making right now?" I felt uncomfortable. Wasn't that a private question? but she explained, with prices going up, it'd help if you could contribute a bit to household expenses. I was shocked, as their business seemed to be thriving, but not wanting to cause trouble. I hesitantly said, I'm only making around $500 a month since I'm handling most of the housework. Her face flushed with anger. Only $500? And you're hardly doing any housework, she said sharply. I felt hurt and tried to explain that I did most of the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and managed the store. She ignored me and went to get my father-in-law. Minutes later, they both returned and announced they'd be returning me to my parents. I was stunned as they drove me to my parents' home and told my father they were sending me back. My father listened and then calmly replied, Fine, if that's what you want, I'll close my construction company. My in-laws tried to argue, but my father wouldn't back down. Frustrated, they finally left, calling me a useless wife and saying I wasn't welcome back. Heartbroken, I looked to my father, who gently said, Maybe it's time to consider a fresh start, Fran. Days passed, and I still hoped Clark might come for me, but all I received was a single message, let's get divorced. Shocked, I tried reaching out, but he never replied. His lawyer handled the rest, and I reluctantly agreed to the divorce terms. In less than a year, my marriage was over. Following this, my father closed his construction company as he had promised. Thankfully, my brother stepped in, reopening it under a new name and cutting ties with Clark's family. Rumors about my in-laws' treatment of me started circulating, and clients gradually drifted away from their business, choosing instead to work with the electricians partnered with my brother. Clark's family began to struggle as their reputation faltered, and soon they were losing clients altogether. My family and I saw it as justice for how they'd treated me. Then, one summer day, something unexpected happened. We received a call from a client, the air conditioner seems broken. My brother went to inspect it, only to find that someone had deliberately damaged the unit. He reported it to the police and replaced the unit, but soon, other clients experienced similar issues. Eventually, my brother provided clients with video intercoms to monitor the situation. Within days, footage captured the culprits, Clark's parents, who confessed to sabotaging the air conditioners in order to create more work for their business. Their actions backfired, leading to their arrest and the collapse of their business. Today, I'm focused on my own life. I work as a graphic designer and help at my brother's store, free from any in-laws' demands. My father, who retired, often checks on me with a concerned, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" His support, though constant, is a reminder of how loved I am. I playfully suggested he help at the store if he was so concerned, and to my surprise, he agreed. Now, my father and I work alongside my brother, building a new chapter for our family. We've been through so much, but in the end, I'm surrounded by people who truly care for me, and for that, I'm grateful.
My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm 23 years old, and I've been working at my father's company. I'm also married to Nathan, who's 29, and we've been together for 2 years. We have a 1-year-old son, Leo. Nathan often suggests I should leave my job at my father's company, mainly because he doesn't like my parents. He seems to be bothered by my father's lack of formal education and the small, somewhat run-down company he runs, which manufactures screws and small components. Nathan doesn't want to be associated with it. In contrast, I admire my father for his hard work, courage in the face of challenges, and genuine care for his employees. I have no plans to leave my father's company. Nathan also seems to dislike that I respect my father more than him. One morning, while having breakfast with Nathan and our son, Leo, he brought up the topic again. "Alyssa, you should consider a job at a bigger company. You graduated from a prestigious university and you're beautiful. I'd love to boast about you at work, but I can't because of where you work now. Besides, I earn enough for us. Why don't you consider staying home instead?" These conversations always end the same way, with me telling Nathan I won't quit my father's company. Typically, Nathan responds with remarks like, "You're the only one in the world who doesn't listen to me," or, "If you keep this up, it will be harder for us to stay together." Then he usually leaves the room. Later, he often does something petty to upset me and then gloats, asking if I'll listen to him now. Though divorce has crossed my mind, I can't bring myself to go through with it. Both our families get along well and love Leo dearly. My father and father-in-law are good friends and spend time golfing and fishing together. My mother and mother-in-law enjoy art exhibitions together. Both sets of parents have provided Leo with a loving environment that I wouldn't want to disrupt. My feelings for Nathan have faded, and I no longer enjoy sharing a bed with him. Since Leo was born, I've been sleeping in Leo's room with the door locked. Nathan used to barge in and argue about my job, scaring Leo with his loud voice. Now he stays away at night, but I keep the door locked just in case. This morning, as usual, Nathan harassed me for not quitting my father's company. Instead of coming home for dinner, he went out drinking with colleagues and sent me a photo of himself smiling with a female coworker. This doesn't bother me or make me feel insecure. He messaged me saying, "This is how I blow off steam because you won't listen to me. Quit your father's company now." I wanted to ignore his message, but for the sake of our families and Leo, I responded, "I just wanted you to come home and have dinner with us." His reply was dismissive. "Must have been tough, huh? I'm coming home now." I regret marrying Nathan. Though he's intelligent, his behavior is immature and frustrating. Then one day, Nathan happily announced, "I might be getting promoted soon," Nathan said with excitement. "Wow, that's great." I replied, "Did that recent deal go through?" "Not finalized yet, but it's as good as done. The boss will be thrilled, maybe even cry with joy. The director who used to be so high and mighty will have to bow down to me now, haha." That day, Nathan surprisingly didn't urge me to quit my job at my father's company. Instead, he headed off to his own workplace while I left home with Leo to go to my office. As usual, I dropped Leo off at my parents' house nearby before going to work. Upon arriving at work, my coworker Jake hurried over to me. "Good morning, Alyssa. The boss seems unusually upset today. Did something happen? Everyone's worried about him." Hearing this, I immediately went to the room labeled Invention Room, where my father was. Inside, I found a young man in his 20s sitting on the sofa, his face streaked with tears. My father, looking more furious than I had ever seen him, was sitting across from the young man. "Sorry, Alyssa, I can't spare the time to chat right now," my father said curtly. "Everyone's worried about you." "What's going on?" I asked, concerned. Apologizing for his abruptness, my father invited me to join the conversation. As I took a seat next to my father and looked at the young man's tear-streaked face, he stood up and introduced himself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Scott." "I'm sorry for causing any trouble," Scott said apologetically. I asked him, "What happened, Scott?" Scott began explaining his situation. He works at an electrical machinery manufacturer and had recently been promoted to assistant leader for a new machinery project. However, the designated leader didn't attend meetings or go to the field, essentially serving as a figurehead. The team members preferred it this way as it made their work easier. Scott found himself fulfilling the leader's responsibilities. Scott mentioned that some components from my father's company were chosen for his project. He visited my father's company without an appointment and, in a disrespectful manner, demanded to speak to the CEO. His appearance, marked by unkempt hair and multiple rings, didn't sit well with my father's secretaries, Jackson and Randy. They asked Scott to adjust his attitude and appearance before returning. Unaware of what was wrong with his demeanor, Scott went back to his company and spoke to his boss, who reacted angrily. "Don't let them walk all over you. Assert yourself and tell them we're using their parts," his boss said. Eager to meet his colleagues' demands and use my father's company's components, Scott returned to my father's company. This time, he approached Jackson and Randy more respectfully, asking, "Please tell me how I can improve my approach." My father happened to overhear the conversation and invited Scott into the meeting room for a discussion. "We don't judge people by their appearances," my father began. "I believe they were trying to teach you workplace etiquette," my father explained. Jackson and Randy nodded in agreement and began instructing Scott on professional conduct. "When you visit other companies, they often judge your entire organization based on your presentation. Which type of company do you think would be better received? One where people are well-dressed and courteous, or one that isn't?" they asked. Scott answered, "The former," and apologized, promising to start anew. After making an appointment, Scott returned with a more polished appearance, back straight, hair neatly styled, and no accessories. As we spoke with him, we saw his sincerity and dedication to his work, not just in terms of components, but also his willingness to collaborate and share ideas. This led to successful cooperation between young members of Scott's company and my father's. They frequently sought advice from us, and progress was made on a new prototype over 6 months. But just as the project neared completion, The leader of Scott's team took all the prepared presentation materials and promoted a favored young female employee, removing the assistant leader from his position. The team and collaborators strongly opposed this, but were silenced with threats of spreading rumors and making their work life difficult. Upon hearing this, my father was enraged. Jackson, who had been listening, commented, "Those rumors are just lies, right? You shouldn't be scared of them." Scott explained that the assistant leader's removal was due to reporting a violation of working hours to the HR department. Despite facing severe warnings, he stood his ground. Scott returned to my father's company because he was frustrated with the changes and wanted to discuss everything. "You should leave that company and come work for us, right, boss?" Jackson suggested. My father, impersonating a character from an iconic Western movie, made everyone but Scott burst into laughter. Scott responded, "Despite the serious work you do, you all seem to enjoy yourselves. I've always admired that, and I want to work with you all," he said with tears in his eyes as he bowed to my father. As I listened to Scott's story, something continued to bother me, prompting me to ask him a question. I asked, "What's the name of your company?" And when Scott responded, it turned out to be the same machinery manufacturing company where my husband worked. Hesitantly, I asked further, "Can I ask the name of your team leader?" As I had feared, Scott answered, "His name is Nathan Johnson." My father and I exchanged a shocked glance and held our heads in disbelief. After a moment of silence, Randy commented, "Ah, I knew I'd heard that name before. It's Alyssa's husband." I explained to Scott, "I'm sorry, but Nathan is my husband." Scott responded, "He's the one who gave me the opportunity to work at this company, so I'm actually grateful to him for that." Jackson seemed to have a concern on his mind and asked cautiously, "Given that Alyssa's here, does the favored female employee have any connection to your husband?" Scott looked at me nervously, unsure of how to proceed. I reassured him, "Don't worry about it. I'm in a sham marriage with my husband. I don't have feelings for him anymore." This revelation took my father by surprise. After apologizing to my father for causing him distress, I opened up about all the difficulties I've been experiencing every day, explaining why I hadn't spoken up sooner. He listened and finally understood the situation. "No wonder my grandson Leo hasn't been very affectionate with me then," he said. He went on to say, "I've lived a life I'm proud of, so I don't care what anyone says about me, but it must be tough for Alyssa to keep hearing negative things about her parents. Don't worry though, I'll maintain my relationship with their parents since they're family and friends. If you ever want to come home, you're always welcome." His words lifted a weight off my shoulders. Jackson then asked Scott, "And what about the relationship between your husband and the favored female employee?" Scott replied, "There are no concrete facts, just rumors circulating. But several employees have witnessed the two of them coming out of meeting rooms or document rooms together. A few have even seen them going out for lunch." At this point, Randy made a phone call. "Hey, I have a situation I'd like you to investigate. Can you come to the office right now?" He asked the person on the other end of the line. Once he hung up, he said, "I'm going to have a friend from a private investigation agency look into this." Jackson then picked up the phone and started dialing, saying, "Hello. I need a lawyer who specializes in divorce cases involving infidelity. Can you come to the office right now?" "Thanks," Jackson said into the phone. As Jackson and Randy made progress with their calls, my dad chuckled and said, "Your ability to take swift action is one of your greatest strengths." Scott offered to keep a close watch on Nathan and the favored female employee for the time being. Everyone then returned to their respective work areas, and my father reassured the concerned employees by saying, "I'm sorry for causing you all worry. But it looks like we can find humor in a situation now. Thank you as always." The employees' smiles returned, and the usual lively atmosphere was restored in the workplace. My father approached me and asked, "May I discuss the recent events with your in-laws?" I responded, "I just want you to encourage them to continue visiting and showering Leo with affection as they always have." By early afternoon, the private detective and the lawyer arrived to discuss our future plans in the planning room. The meeting's contents were shared with everyone present, and it was decided that Jackson, who had returned to the company, would relay the meeting's details to me after work. When I went to pick up Leo from my parents' house, I explained the situation from my perspective, apologizing for not revealing my husband's true nature sooner. I felt guilty for trampling on my parents' beliefs that my marriage was happy. My mother, instead of being upset, seemed relieved. Now we need to prepare a room for my daughter and grandson, she said, smiling. She remembered the disdainful look my husband had given my father's company when he first saw it and had suspected he wasn't a good man. I wish you had told me sooner. The next day, Jackson received a call from Scott on his smartphone. Scott had submitted his resignation, explaining that he planned to spend his remaining time at the company on miscellaneous tasks and transitioning his responsibilities without taking any paid time off. The company accepted his resignation, but members of the project team visited the HR department to declare, "We've all violated the company's work rules like Mr. Scott, so please discipline us as well." With resignation letters in hand, the HR department was thrown into chaos. By the end of the regular workday, my husband had already left the office. A meeting was held in the large conference room, attended by the company president, department heads, and the remaining project team members, including Scott. It was revealed that my husband, the team leader, had not attended any meetings or been present at work, nor had he contributed to the project. Instead, he took credit for the work the team had completed, removed Scott from his role as assistant leader, and replaced him with a favored female employee. The company president expressed deep regret at the situation if the allegations were true. Scott suggested that no immediate action be taken until all evidence was gathered. Since the sister-in-law of one of the company's clients was conducting an investigation using a private detective, it was proposed that nothing be said to my husband without concrete evidence. The company agreed to wait for the evidence and then question my husband before deciding on disciplinary action. They asked the team members to hold off on submitting their resignations. Unaware of these serious developments, my husband, who usually returned home on time, came home around 9 p.m. after Leo had gone to bed. He began ranting about how ineffective everyone else was, boasting that he had been working overtime to ensure the project's success. He believed everyone was jealous because he was on the path to becoming a department head after the project's success. Knowing the truth, I couldn't help but chuckle at his delusions. In his good mood, I offered him a few compliments, which I didn't really mean. He seemed to relish imagining himself as the future department head, basking in the admiration and envy of others. My husband kept grinning, fueled by his fantasies. Meanwhile, at work, Scott's plan was set in motion. The team members began to shower my husband with continuous praise. "Mr. Department Head," they teased, "not quite yet, but the CEO seems very optimistic about the project." They flattered him with comments like, "How can we become as competent as you, Mr. Johnson?" My husband was overjoyed and caught up in his newfound popularity, becoming increasingly less guarded. Then, as planned, we managed to capture videos of his affair with a female employee using hidden cameras in the document and conference rooms. In just 5 days, the detective agency and Scott amassed substantial evidence of his infidelity. All that remained was to prove my husband hadn't created the project documents himself. This task was straightforward. Scott had saved the documents on a USB drive, which would clearly expose the truth if the company questioned him and my husband about their contents. Scott and other team members submitted all the evidence to the company. Unaware of any of this, my husband returned home in high spirits. He launched into his fantasies, saying, "I'm definitely going to be named department head." The CEO had a long conversation with the current head, and then the head looked at me. He must have told him, "I'd rather have Mr. Johnson's head in charge than any incompetent person." He continued his daydreams. "This will widen the gap between your father's company and mine even more. You should quit your job and become a full-time housewife. You'll be the wife of a department head," he said. I responded loudly, feigning anger. "Your parents would be furious if they knew you were mocking mine. You'd have their close friends. I take pride in my work and enjoy it. I'm not quitting." My husband snapped back, "Never invite your parents to our family events again. If you don't like it, get out. I'll have women lining up for me once I become department head." When I asked if he was certain, he retorted, "What do you mean? Don't contact me again." So I replied, "All right, I'll leave," and hadn't signed the divorce papers I prepared. The next morning, I watched him leave for work in silence. Then I called my father to help me move. As my father, his coworkers, and I loaded our belongings onto a truck, my in-laws arrived offering their assistance. "We came to help," they said, and we exchanged apologies. "Thank you for allowing us to be Leo's grandparents. Our fool of a son is disowned. We're counting on you now, Alyssa," they said, bowing their heads. I held their hands and bowed in return, expressing my gratitude. My father said, "Let's hurry and move everything so we can relax at home," to which my father-in-law agreed. "Let's do that," as they both continued to help with the move. Once we finished the move, in front of my parents and in-laws, I showed them the signed divorce papers and explained that I was parting ways with my husband. My in-laws repeatedly apologized, but my father reassured them, saying, "Let's keep getting along, Ken," and gave my father-in-law a friendly pat on the knee. My mother chimed in, "Mary, let's continue our embroidery sessions together. There's an art exhibition next week. Let's go." She gave my mother-in-law an affectionate pat on the knee. "Ken, Mary, why don't you stay at our house tonight for some drinks?" My father offered, bringing out the beverages. My father-in-law accepted. "Thanks, we'll take you up on that offer tonight." The cordial interaction brought my parents and in-laws even closer, without me feeling like I was intruding. That night, I decided to go to Leo's room and rest. The next day, my husband was summoned to a conference room by the company's executives, including the CEO and department head. Also present were Scott, the team members, and the female employee he had an affair with. The CEO conducted the hearing himself, questioning my husband about whether he had tried to claim the project as his own without contributing to it and stealing the completed documents. Since Scott and the team members were there, my husband couldn't find an excuse and remained silent. The CEO, growing impatient, demanded loudly, "Well, what do you have to say?" Under pressure, my husband quickly admitted to his actions. Next, the CEO questioned him about why he had demoted Scott from the sub-leader position and replaced him with the female employee. My husband tried to justify it by saying she was more capable than Scott. The department head countered, "You're saying the woman who only serves tea and makes copies is more capable than Mr. Scott." My husband bit his lip, lowering his head in silence. The CEO then projected still images from video footage taken in the conference room and document room, leaving both my husband and the female employee, Alice, looking pale. The CEO asked Alice, "Miss Ford, what is the meaning of this?" Alice responded without hesitation, explaining that Mr. Johnson had promised her an easier time at work if they were together, but she hadn't been serious about the relationship since she already had a boyfriend. "I just considered it part of the job," she added. My husband, enraged by her response, exclaimed, "You had a boyfriend? You cheating woman. You've ruined my life." Alice snapped back, "You have a wife, Tim Nathan. Don't get mad at me." The argument between them escalated, prompting the CEO to interrupt. "Enough. The fact-finding is over. I'll inform you of the disciplinary action later. Until then, Mr. Johnson and Miss Ford, you are both suspended and must stay home." With that, the CEO left the conference room, and everyone else followed suit. My husband was eventually reassigned to a manual job in the basement, sorting documents in what was known as the company's useless department. Alice, who struggled at the office after her boyfriend found out about the affair, eventually resigned. A lawyer had drawn up an agreement for them to sign, with my husband required to pay me $3 million and Alice $2 million in compensation. Both had to take out loans from finance companies to make the payments. Additionally, my husband agreed to pay an extra $5,000 per month for Leo's child support. A few months later, my husband, now disowned by his parents, was working 2 jobs, one at a convenience store during the day and another as a security guard at night. He lived alone in a run-down apartment and looked much older than his years. As someone who saw him remarked, he appeared to be around 60 years old.
One day, my husband approached me and inquired, "Hey, how much money do we have in that safe?" I couldn't help but chuckle and replied, probably around $500,000 in total. Now, the following day, upon returning home, I discovered a signed divorce paper on the living room table. Both my husband and the vault were gone. My name is Helen, a 58-year-old working housewife who still puts in diligent effort at my job. You see, my hobby is saving money. Ever since my childhood, my mother opened a savings account for me, teaching me that depositing money in the bank would make the numbers in my passbook grow. I found it incredibly enjoyable to witness this growth. Starting with just $1, I would deposit a little bit at a time, relishing the experience of watching it accumulate. As my savings grew over the years, earning a few cents in interest annually became a delightful surprise to my younger self. With a fondness for money and understanding how it works, I pursued a career as a financial planner, offering advice on asset management. One day, a college friend approached me concerned about an old childhood friend who was in serious trouble due to debt. They asked if I could offer some advice, and intrigued, I agreed to meet with him. This friend, named Mark, was a handsome man with a refreshing smile. He shared his story, confessing his love for gambling and the struggles he faced in making ends meet. Feeling sympathetic, I offered Mark some guidance. Given his precarious financial situation, I advised him to consolidate his debts and reduce his monthly payments to better manage his life. As my friend had asked for my help, I willingly lent a hand. Looking back now, I realized that perhaps I had developed a slight crush on Mark during our interactions. Little did I know that this would lead to a series of troublesome events. Against the advice of my friend, Mark and I decided to get married, believing that our union would help us face his debts together. Due to my stable income and financial expertise, most of Mark's income went towards paying off his debt. I made sure he severed ties with his parents to prevent the debt from escalating. Additionally, I provided Mark with a monthly allowance of $500. However, when Mark decided to cut ties with his parents, they responded with anger and resentment. His mother labeled him an ungrateful child, regretting ever giving birth to him. His father too expressed his discontent, desiring to confront me for what he considered thieving behavior. It was clear that they believed Mark belonged to them as a means to repay their debts. Exhausted from dealing with his parents' debt for so long, Mark finally stood up for himself, declaring he was not their ATM. He returned to me, feeling relieved to be free from their constant reminders of the financial burden. Soon after, we welcomed a son, Kevin, who bore a striking resemblance to Mark. Kevin became my pride and joy, but unfortunately, he inherited his father's lack of discipline and indecisiveness. Just as our son noticed Mark's carefree character, he also observed the never-ending cycle of borrowing money from predatory lenders, dealing with loan sharks, and tricking friends into lending him money for gambling. Our journey was not without its challenges, but I managed to keep Mark on track. Over the span of 23 years, we gradually reduced Mark's debt to around $10,000, nearing full repayment. One day, while on the verge of achieving our financial goal, Mark received a call from his parents. They informed him that his father had collapsed and was at the hospital. Concerned, Mark left work early to be by his parents' side. He messaged me, apologizing for breaking our promise and explaining the situation. I encouraged him to go and comfort his parents, assuring him it was all right. As Mark continued visiting his parents at the hospital, I provided him with a little extra money for the hospital fees they couldn't afford. It seemed my in-laws were struggling financially and relying on Mark for support. Although he withdrew a significant amount from our joint funds each visit, around $1,000 to $2,000 per month, I chose to let it slide, understanding their need for assistance. A year had passed since my father-in-law's collapse, and both my in-laws had aged significantly. They sought someone to lean on, and I suppose they found comfort in Mark's presence. Meanwhile, I continued my hobby of saving money. One day, I retrieved my bank book from the vault and smiled. Mark, who usually showed no interest in my financial endeavors, looked at me and asked, "Hey, how much money do we have in that bank account you always look at so happily?" I casually replied, "It's about $500,000 now." However, the next morning, I discovered divorce papers completed and left in the living room. Both Mark and the safe were gone. As I sat there having breakfast, I couldn't help but smile. I knew Mark had his eyes on the money in the vault, and he had planned to take it all. Imagining him attempting to carry the entire vault nearly made me burst out laughing. In our home, we had a black cat named Luna. We had installed a pet camera to watch Luna's adorable antics, which served as healing moments throughout my day. Luna provided a sense of comfort amid the unexpected turn of events. While watching the pet camera during my lunch breaks, I was always greeted by the adorable sight of my child. But one day, as I switched on the camera, something unexpected unfolded in our living room. My in-laws and my husband Mark engaged in an unbelievable conversation. "Oh, you live in such a nice house, Mark. Your good salary makes your mother so proud," they flattered him. Mark's father responded proudly, "Indeed, I make a decent salary myself. However, Helen takes it all, and I'm left with a mere allowance of $500 a month." "Are you kidding me? That's outrageous. You should be getting more," they exclaimed, sympathizing with Mark. "Why do you obey such a tyrant like Helen? You could live a much better life on your own," they continued. "Mark, you're our pride. You could have saved hundreds of thousands by now. But she's exploiting you? Poor thing." They manipulated him. Listening to their conversation, I wondered if they had completely forgotten that I had worked hard to pay off Mark's debts. I pondered what was going on in their heads. In the past, it was Mark burdened with debt from his parents, and I had to provide them with cash every month, making it challenging for us to get by. "Did you know she has a bank book with tons of savings? It's not fair that you only get $500. Mark complained, and in that moment, my in-laws' eyes lit up. They exchanged glances and eagerly leaned in, awaiting Mark's response. Last I heard, I think it was around $400,000 or $500,000, Mark answered. "Mark, isn't that money rightfully yours?" they asked, trying to persuade him. "It may not match the effort you've put in, but shouldn't you be receiving that money?" "Yeah, I guess you're right. I'm starting to think the same thing," Mark conceded. Despite his good looks, Mark was easily influenced and indecisive. In the past, I found this endearing and wholeheartedly devoted myself to him. However, it seemed he was being manipulated by his parents once again, and they were about to touch my precious savings. Witnessing this scene was incredibly painful. Tears streamed down my face as I sat at my desk at work, holding my phone. For the past 23 years, I had diligently set aside my own living expenses from Mark's income, primarily using it to pay off our debt. On top of that, I provided him with a $500 allowance from my own pocket. Despite explaining this to Mark, it appeared he had completely forgotten what the past 23 years had been for. I felt a deep sadness and pitifulness, as if I were drowning in my own tears in that moment. I made the decision to record the conversation and promptly sent the data to my son. Claiming sickness, I left work early and headed to my regular bar, where I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. Pouring out my heart to the bartender, he gently comforted me, saying, "Why do you grieve for someone like that? You've done nothing wrong. There's no need to live for them. Live for yourself." In that moment, my love for my husband and my intoxication faded away. "Thank you, sir. Next time, we'll share a pleasant dream," I said to the bartender before leaving. Returning home, I entered my study and began devising a plan to retrieve the bank book from the safe. I couldn't fathom how to accomplish it, but I was determined to show them hell. They should never underestimate me. Concentrating harder than ever, I knew that gathering evidence was the first step. From that day on, I diligently checked the pet camera every day, and slowly, the ugly truths began to surface. Instead of the woman my husband was having an affair with, my in-laws started appearing on the camera in our house. They were discussing their plan to take the bank book from me. "Is everything arranged to take that bank book from Helen?" they asked, grinning unpleasantly. "You're smart. You must have thought of something, right?" "Yeah, I have a plan. I'm thinking of taking the entire vault." "It'll be easy," Mark responded confidently. "But the safe is quite heavy." "Are you sure you can handle it?" his father questioned. "I'll be fine. I'll load it onto a cart." "Dad, helping out," Mark replied, and his father agreed, saying, "All right, I'll assist you anytime." The safe weighed around 120 pounds, confirming my suspicion that Mark, despite his good looks, was not very smart. At that moment, I solemnly pledged to drag these people down to the depths of hell. They had not only betrayed me, but also ruined the precious moments I spent watching Luna, our cat. Witnessing my husband's infidelity through the camera was a painful blow. I had hoped to find solace in Luna's presence, but even she seemed scared and wouldn't show up. These people had shattered my peace, but I vowed to punish them severely. One day, while I was working, I activated the pet camera once again. This time, it wasn't the woman my husband was having an affair with. Instead, it was my in-laws at our house, discussing their plan to take the bank book from me. With determination in my heart, I continued to gather evidence, and soon the day would come when I would execute my plan and show them the consequences of underestimating me. Facing the reality of my impending divorce, I found myself strangely accepting of the situation. Just how desperate were these people to go after money? I sat at my office desk, sipping coffee, and recorded the scene on my phone screen. Surprisingly, I wasn't upset or sad anymore. If they had such intentions, so did I. I was determined to show them the consequences of their actions. Then, the day finally arrived. "Hey, how much money is in that passbook on the vault? You always seem so happy when you're looking at it," Mark asked. "Right now, there's about $500,000 in there," I replied casually. The next day when I arrived home, I discovered a signed divorce paper in the living room. Both my husband and the vault were gone. A smirk formed on my face as I sat down to have breakfast. I acted quickly, immediately filing the divorce papers and contacting my son Kevin. "Your father finally stole the vault. Can't believe he managed to carry it. It's so heavy," I told him. Kevin responded, "Mom, I think it's about time you end things with Dad. By the way, did he take everything in the vault too?" "No, actually, I moved all the money to online banking. The passbook is essentially worthless now. The most valuable thing might have been the safe itself since it was so heavy. Oh, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. Now I'm thinking about filing a police report. What do you think?" I explained to Kevin, who agreed and suggested that I should file a police report and hire a lawyer. Right, a lawyer. I already have a private investigator on it, but I hadn't thought about a lawyer. "Thanks," I replied to Kevin. He seemed exasperated. Following Kevin's suggestion, I reached out to a lawyer through my private investigative contact. I handed over the recording from my pet camera to both the police and the lawyer, and then I waited. After a while, I received a call from my ex-husband, sounding quite frantic. "What the hell? The passbook is empty. What happened to the $500,000? You tricked me. That was my money. Where is it? Tell me now, or I'm going back to the house and abandoning your cat Luna," he threatened. "You just committed theft, and now you're threatening me. From now on, communicate through my lawyer," I calmly responded and blocked his number. I reported the incident to the police and sent the recording to my lawyer. It was a relief to finally take action. This was exactly what I had wanted to do. A short while later, I received a call from the police. "We have caught the thief. However, the vault was damaged. It appears he forced it open, and the things inside were burned," they informed me. My ex-husband and his parents learned that the passbook balance was zero, and they set the contents of the vault on fire. Although it was his first offense, my ex-husband spent a few days in custody. Discoveries continued as my ex-husband broke into the house he used to live in after his release. However, I had already filed for a divorce and obtained a restraining order. When he started causing a scene, I called the police, and within 10 minutes, they took him away again. I contacted my lawyer, explained what happened, and had him start the process of getting a restraining order. Furthermore, I asked the lawyer to sue for emotional distress due to his infidelity. The lawyer mentioned that we might not get much money from his broke family, but that didn't really matter to me. What I wanted was alimony. It seems my ex-husband broke into our house because he was discarded by his mistress and wanted to get back with me. His mistress promptly transferred $10,000 as alimony and seemed to have disappeared. It appears they split after the vault incident, realizing that when the money runs out, so does the love. My underpaid ex-husband, who still has $10,000 in debt, and his gambling-addicted parents seem to be struggling with their daily lives. He is living in an old single-room apartment without a bath, constantly quarreling with his parents. This information came from my lawyer. My ex-husband pleaded with me, saying, "I can't afford to pay the alimony. Please reduce the amount." But I refused, telling him to stay away from me. "If you're really sorry, show it with money," I said. If he had stayed with me, he had planned to end the remaining $10,000 of debt by the time he retired. But he fell for the sweet talk of his gambling-addicted parents-in-law. In the end, how foolish they all were. The $500,000 in savings was the accumulation of my hard work since a young age. I find joy in saving small change and updating the bank book. Now I will start a new bank book. I am living a relaxed life with my black cat Luna. My son visits occasionally and tells me about his girlfriend. This time, I am going to spend time for myself. I need to buy a new safe, one that's so big that a person can't carry it. Right, Luna? I am the happiest I've ever been.
To mark his retirement, I'm organizing a special trip to Spain with our parents. Starting today, I'll be using your Platinum card for the expenses to ensure we can make the most of this celebration. I hope you understand the urgency as we need to leave soon. Wait, I'm a bit confused. Did you mean you're using my card? Could you explain more about the trip? Sorry, I have to leave now, but we can talk about the details when I return. Just a heads up though, the card might not work. Apparently, my husband Daniel already took it to fund a vacation with our parents. I've tolerated a lot from Daniel, but this time he's crossed the line. When he gets back, he's going to regret that decision. My name is Angela. At 35, I've built a successful career at a major company after graduating from a prestigious university. Despite my young age, I'd earn enough to support not only myself but also Daniel, who's currently unemployed, and even a potential child, though we haven't started a family yet. We've been married for 4 years and the idea of having kids is still floating around. But while I have a stable job and a good income, I can't say I'm fully satisfied with my life. The thought of becoming a parent is just that, a thought. Daniel's unemployment, on the other hand, is a very real, pressing issue. Tonight, I'm not hungry because I snacked earlier, but that's trivial compared to Daniel's job situation. He didn't even go to the interview he had today. Instead, he stayed home browsing job sites. Daniel left his last full-time job over a year ago, and since then, he's only worked temporary part-time gigs, quitting each one after a short stint. He's currently looking at both full-time and part-time options, and I keep pushing him to focus on landing something permanent. I know timing is important, but I really wish he would find something stable soon. I know I can't push him too hard. He had a bad fallout at his last job due to a disagreement over work policies. At first, his coworkers supported him when he challenged his boss, but as tensions rose, they all sided with the boss, leaving Daniel isolated. Feeling betrayed and unsupported, he couldn't continue at the company and ended up resigning. After that, Daniel withdrew into himself. He spent weeks locked in his room, barely engaging with anyone. Slowly, he started to come around, helping out around the house, though his smiles never quite reached his eyes. After 3 weeks, he began job hunting again with a sense of optimism, determined to start fresh. But the process was harder than either of us expected. Despite his efforts and qualifications, rejection after rejection poured in, which Daniel believes stems from the bad blood with his former employer. Every rejection took a piece of him, leaving him disillusioned and questioning his own worth. The frustration built up. One day, I came home to shredded resumes littering the living room floor. It was clear that his latest interview hadn't gone well. I tried to approach the situation gently, suggesting he clean up the mess. That's when Daniel told me he was thinking about giving up on the job hunt altogether. He said there was no point. After all, we could live on my salary alone. While some people thrive as full-time homemakers, this wasn't the life Daniel envisioned for himself. It felt more like a way to avoid confronting the challenges of his job search. I could see how deeply his last job experience had scared him, and how the repeated rejections had chipped away at his confidence. I decided to give Daniel some space and support, hoping he'd eventually find his way. But in the meantime, we needed to have a serious conversation about our future and his career plans. This situation wasn't sustainable in the long term. I've always been dedicated to my work, and I knew this extended break wasn't about idling away. For me, it was a period of preparation for what was coming next. It's good to hear you're focusing on the future, I said, trying to reassure myself as much as him. Living close to my in-laws, Daniel's mom, Helen, and his dad, Peter, had its own dynamics. They began visiting more frequently after Daniel quit his job, probably out of concern. When they heard he was gearing up for his next career move, they seemed visibly relieved, but the reality was different. "The beer's running low. Can you pick some up on your way home?" I asked one evening. "Again? You're drinking too much. Maybe try to cut back a bit," I gently suggested. "Fine, I won't ask again. I'll just get it myself," Daniel snapped, his tone sharper than usual. Despite the appearance of preparing for a new job, Daniel wasn't making any real progress. His days were filled with TV and beer, and I could tell he was embarrassed about his unemployment. To protect his pride, I chose not to disclose the full extent of his inactivity to his parents. After more than 4 months without any job hunting activity, I realized it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Daniel, maybe it's time to start looking for work again. You seem more settled now," I ventured cautiously. "What? It's only been 7 months since I left my last job, and you want me to go back already? After everything that happened?" he replied, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. I could feel the tension rising, but I knew we couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. "I just think the break has been quite long. Let's not drag this out," I pressed, hoping to push the conversation forward. "Stop nagging. You can't understand my feelings when your job is going well. I have my struggles too, you know. Everyone faces work problems and relationship issues." Daniel shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. Despite the tension, Daniel eventually agreed to start job hunting, which felt like a small victory. But the conversation had clearly upset him, and he walked out, still fuming. When things calmed down, I planned to apologize, hoping to smooth things over. Not long after, Daniel surprised me with an update. "I got a job, because you pushed me," he said one day, his voice a mix of reluctance and acknowledgement. "That's great. Where?" I asked, eager for more details. "At a nearby supermarket," he replied. Then, with a hint of dismissal, he added, "So yeah, you'll need to learn and work hard, right?" I tried to encourage him. "That's fantastic, whether part-time or full-time. Any job is significant," but Daniel quickly brushed it off. "It's just part-time. No need to work too hard." I bit my tongue, holding back any further comments. I figured that, for now, this was a step in the right direction, and maybe it would help him regain his footing. A few weeks later, Daniel came home one day and announced, "I'm back." "You're home early. How's the job going at the pub?" I asked, mistakenly mixing up his actual workplace. "I quit the supermarket job," he replied, his frustration evident. A college student there was being bossy, always telling me where to put the boxes in storage. It felt like harassment. I sighed internally. The student was probably just explaining proper procedures, something common in any job setting. But Daniel's pattern of finding and quitting jobs continued, and it was becoming clear that his challenges went deeper than just finding the right position. A year had passed since our last serious talk about work, and Daniel now tells me he's working part-time at a pub, an industry he'd never tried before. He's fascinated by it and claims he might have found his true passion. "Really? That's fantastic," I replied, hoping that this time, something would stick. I respond, though I can't help but worry about the financial aspect. "But isn't the income from a part-time job in a restaurant somewhat limited?" "That's okay," Daniel assures me, his eyes alight with a new kind of determination. "I'm apprenticing right now, but I'm aiming to become independent. I plan to own my own place someday." "That sounds like a solid plan," I reply, genuinely pleased to see him with a goal. Wanting to encourage him, I added, "Here, take this and treat yourself to something nice for once," handing him some money to support his new venture. However, the reality behind Daniel's optimistic facade soon became clear. Just 5 days after our conversation, he quit the pub job. Worse, he continued to deceive everyone around him, including his parents, from whom he accepted money under false pretenses. This revelation hit hard, and I found myself grappling with growing frustration and disappointment. Determined to address the issue head-on, I seized the opportunity one evening while he was watching a movie. "Hey Daniel, let's talk," I said, reaching for the remote and pausing the film. "It's frustrating when you pause at the best part." "What is it?" Daniel complained, clearly irritated. "Daniel, you're 37 now, right? That's prime working age. Don't you think about the future? You spend all day at home, drinking and watching TV. The future? There are plenty of 37-year-olds not working. Lots of people enjoy life without a job," he retorted defensively. "True, work isn't everything, but those people have something they're dedicated to. Do you have something like that?" Yeah, I know you're upset about me not working. "I'll look for another part-time job," Daniel replied, his tone dismissive but with a hint of concession. Though he seemed set on working only part-time, considering his history of quitting jobs and his deeper issues, I had been cautious about pushing him too hard. But now it was clear, Daniel needed to find some stability. Then, one day while I was at work, I received an unexpected text from Daniel. "Dad's retiring, so we're going to Spain to celebrate. Starting today, I'm borrowing your platinum card. We're going to enjoy ourselves on your credit card." Alarmed, I stared at my phone, unsure of what to do next. I call him immediately. "What do you mean you're going on a trip?" "Just what I said," he replies, irritation creeping into his tone. "I don't understand. Please explain," I press, frustration mounting. The implications of his actions are manifold. Celebrating Peter's retirement is fine, but Daniel should have discussed the trip with me before using my money and credit card without asking. The thought that he might have told his parents he paid for it himself, using my credit card no less, only fuels my anger and sense of betrayal. This situation serves as a stark reminder that despite some steps forward, we still have deeper issues to confront. Daniel's recent actions highlight a significant moment in our ongoing struggles with responsibility and communication. As we discuss his upcoming trip to Spain, something he said caught my attention. "You mentioned borrowing a credit card. Do you mean the one from our house?" I ask. "Yeah, why?" he replies nonchalantly. "Daniel, I own a platinum credit card. Contrary to popular belief, it's not just for those with high incomes. Factors like credit history and stable income play a part. It's possible to secure one in your 30s despite its high annual fee. I value the benefits and points it offers, but that card was supposed to be in my wallet." "So you took the credit card from home?" I press. "Yeah, so I'm counting on you for the payment," Daniel responds, a bit too cheerfully for the situation. His casual demeanor and eagerness to leave make it clear he thinks he has everything under control, but the truth is about to complicate his plans significantly. "What are you waiting for? We need to leave," he urges, eager to get moving. "Hold on," I interrupt. "The credit card you took won't work." "What? That can't be right," he exclaims. "It's under Angela's name, and it expires this month." "It's close, but it shouldn't be an issue," he counters, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You're lying. You're just trying to stop me from using the card," Daniel accuses, frustration mounting. "Yes, it does expire this month, I admit. That's why I've already received a new one. Sometimes when a new card is activated, the old one stops working. I've already started using the new card, so the one you took won't work." "Are you kidding me? You think I'm lying?" His voice tinges with panic. "If you don't believe me, I can send you the URL to the credit card website, or you can just try using the card. It would be funny to see you try to pay with a card that doesn't work." "This credit card really won't work," he mutters, more to himself than to me. I can hear his parents calling him in the background, but he seems too flustered to respond. "What should I do? I told them I'd pay for everything except the round-trip travel," he says. "Oh, they covered the flight?" I ask, realizing the gravity of his situation. "Yes, Dad felt bad about covering all the trip costs," Daniel explains, a hint of relief in his voice. "What should I do? I'm about to take a cab, and I don't even have money for that." "That's not my problem," I respond firmly. "You said you would pay for everything except the flight. Using my credit card in the first place was wrong. You should pay with your own money." "How can I? I don't have any money right now," Daniel exclaims, the reality of his predicament sinking in. "Daniel, you haven't been taking work seriously," I conclude, watching the situation unfold as a stark reminder of the broader issues at play. Daniel's reliance on deception rather than facing his responsibilities head-on has led us to yet another crossroads. It all came to a head when Daniel tried to impress his parents by planning a trip without having the actual means to fund it. As I hung up the phone to return to my work, I left Daniel in a predicament where he would eventually need to confess to his parents about his financial deception. Later that evening, after my workday ended, I received a call from Helen, Daniel's mother. I heard from Helen that Daniel had tried to use my credit card and lied about working. "I'm so sorry for the trouble," she apologized. "No, don't apologize, Helen," I replied, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience with the credit card. Are you okay with the money?" she asked, attempting to smooth over the immediate concerns. "We'll cover the costs of this trip when we return. I'll make sure Daniel apologizes and starts looking for a job immediately," Helen assured me, though a hint of worry colored her voice. "I appreciate that, but I'm considering divorcing Daniel," I confess, letting the weight of my decision hang heavily between us. "Divorce? Because of this?" Helen's surprise was evident even over the phone. "It's part of it," I admitted. "Daniel has been taking money from me for a while. I stopped giving him cash to limit his drinking. He got a part-time job and started buying his own alcohol, but his salary couldn't cover his daily expenses. He's been taking money from my wallet to buy alcohol, sometimes just $10, other times $50. Over the year, it added up. When he took my credit card for this trip, it made me realize he had no intention of changing." "I understand. Should I inform Daniel about the divorce?" Helen asked, her tone now somber. Could you just tell him I want a divorce? We can discuss the rest when he gets home," I requested, hoping to manage the situation more personally. The next morning, I received a call from Daniel, likely having learned about the divorce from Helen. Feeling drained, I chose not to answer. That evening, when I returned home from work, I found Daniel waiting for me in the living room, having cut his trip short. "I'll start working seriously now. Please don't leave me," he pleaded, his apology seeming sincere. Seeing him apologize and show remorse was unexpected, but it came far too late. He had a whole year to change, yet here he was asking for another chance after all my repeated warnings and the countless opportunities he wasted. "I'm not going to give you another chance, Daniel. You gave up on me a long time ago. My decision is final. Can you please leave?" I said, standing firm in my resolve to move forward without him. The cycle of broken promises had to end, along with our path together. "Please don't say that. If you won't let me stay, should I move out?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Only if you can afford the rent here," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Daniel fell silent, the harsh reality of his financial instability and the looming divorce weighing heavily on him. He had no money for next month's rent, let alone a steady income to depend on. As the realization set in, he seemed to shrink before my eyes. With no options left, he quietly left the house. I watched him go, a part of me wanting to offer help for transportation, but I reminded myself that Daniel wasn't a child. He needed to manage his affairs. It was a sad moment, seeing him depart under such strange circumstances. Later, after Daniel had gone to his parents' house, Helen called me. They had let him stay for the night, but told him he must leave the next day. They were worried that if he stayed longer, it might encourage his dependence on them. As tough as it was for them, they believed it was necessary for Daniel's development. When Daniel returned to our house, desperation was clear in his voice. "Please help me. I've got nowhere to go and no money," he pleaded. "That's the result of your actions. You need to handle this yourself," I responded firmly. Over the past year, all Daniel had done was neglect his responsibilities and do as he pleased. It was painful but necessary to deny him entry, turning him away right at our doorstep. The divorce proceedings, though tense, were expedited with the support of his parents. I'm not entirely sure what became of Daniel afterward. He's likely still hopping from job to job, crafting excuses for his situation. I thought I would feel lonely without him, but I didn't. His presence had been a constant source of stress, always walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting him. Now free from the need to accommodate his whims, I've been living more comfortably. Unknowingly, our life together had become a burden, one I hadn't fully recognized until he was gone. Relieved of that weight, I now find myself living a lighter, more authentic life, no longer tethered to the needs and failures of someone else.
Now that the troublesome situation has passed, we can relax and enjoy ourselves. He whispered these words to his niece's ear. The cause of the trouble was none other than his daughter. I had to leave home abruptly for a business trip. Despite my concerns about being away from my daughter for several days, John reassured me and bid me farewell, urging me to go in peace. My daughter and John usually spent quality time together, so I felt at ease leaving her in his care. However, recently, my daughter's behavior had taken a peculiar turn. In hindsight, I should have delved deeper into these feelings. "Mommy, don't go to work." My daughter clung to my leg, reluctant to let go. Unfortunately, I failed to recognize her desperate plea for help. Feeling like a failure as a mother, little did I know that John would lock my daughter in the storage room and embark on a trip with his niece. Forgiving John for the irreversible harm he caused to my daughter and niece is something I can never do. My name is Sherry. I married John the same year I became pregnant. Our daughter, Samantha, is now 5 years old. Our paths crossed through a common friend's introduction, a rather ordinary occurrence at the time. John, who had a fondness for children, worked at a toy manufacturing company, while I had just been chosen for a work project. Despite being engrossed in our respective careers, marriage was not on our minds. However, upon discovering my pregnancy with Samantha, everything changed. Having the baby meant taking a maternity leave and facing potential sidelining from the project. Witnessing similar situations at my workplace, I felt disheartened about my professional future. Yet John consoled me, expressing his willingness to quit his job and become a full-time stay-at-home dad. He had taken his current job with the hope that our future kids would play with the toys he helped create. John had already played a role in developing several products, some of which were already on the market. His dream was for me to fulfill my potential. These words prompted me to decide to have our daughter. I explained the situation to my company and returned to work 3 months after giving birth. Despite a slight gap, I managed to stay on the project, gaining valuable experience. Returning to work so soon after childbirth was challenging, but the thought of John and Samantha waiting at home fueled my determination. Currently leading a newly launched project, I strive to leave work on time by working remotely during weekdays. Although weekends, work, and business trips are sometimes inevitable, my daughter remains supportive, encouraging me with strong words. The concept of a full-time stay-at-home dad was not fully understood by society, but as a family, we harmonized our roles, leading to a happy life. One day, my sister-in-law discussed her divorce with us. Her husband, 10 years her senior, had frequent clashes due to differing opinions. The final straw was when he raised his hand against her. The divorce brought relief to my sister-in-law, who no longer had to witness her daughter Lily cry. Lily, an 11-year-old, had experienced the violence firsthand, prompting the decision to divorce. John, with his usual sense of humor, offered support, jokingly saying, "If you ever need anything, just say the word. I'm always home." Although it brought laughter, we nodded in agreement with John's sentiment. His words played a crucial role when John decided to quit his job and become a full-time stay-at-home dad. It's not about being a man or a woman these days. Whoever can do it should. Without my sister-in-law's support, we might not have maintained a good relationship with our in-laws. Our happiness owes part of its existence to her. Expressing gratitude, she mentioned considering a move to our neighborhood. We welcomed the idea, ensuring her that it wouldn't be a bother. Facing the need to leave the rental apartment shared with her ex-husband, she pondered returning to her in-laws' house an hour away. However, this would complicate her commute, and Lily would have to change schools. Fortunately, our house was within Lily's school district. They found a vacant apartment nearby and decided to move in. Suggesting that we look after Lily after school until her mother finished work, John and I agreed. Despite my sister-in-law's initial concerns about being overprotective, our proximity allowed us to keep a close eye on Lily, making John's role vital in the process. With Lily in our care during her mother's working hours, we began a new chapter in our family life. Living nearby, my daughter and her cousin quickly adapted to the routine. Initially, everything seemed to be going smoothly, However, my daughter's sudden resistance to being apart from me raised questions. Accustomed to seeing me off to work from a young age, I assumed she was comfortable with the routine. Was she feeling lonely, or was there another source of anxiety? Puzzled by her behavior, I attempted reassurance. "Mommy's just going to work. I'll be back tonight." Despite my attempts, my daughter clung tighter, revealing her inner turmoil. Concerned, I discussed the situation with John, who optimistically suggested that perhaps something happened at preschool. Assuring me that Lily's presence would provide comfort, John believed they might share secrets and alleviate any concerns my daughter had. Hoping this was the case, I refrained from pressing my daughter for answers. My daughter and Lily formed a close bond, with Lily treating her like a little sister. Observing their camaraderie, I believed my daughter's behavior was a passing phase. As my workload approached a lull, I planned to take leave and spend quality time with my daughter soon. However, unexpectedly, a business trip arose, requiring my absence for 5 days. Despite concerns, John's reassuring words encouraged me to proceed with the trip. Packed and ready, I left home 2 days later, with Lily visiting at the time. John, my daughter, and Lily saw me off with smiles. Little did I know that, at that very moment, events were unfolding at home beyond my expectations. John, exhibiting signs of departure, raised anxious questions from Lily. "Isn't Samantha coming with us?" John, to ease Lily's worries, fabricated a story about Samantha joining me on the business trip upon my return. Convinced by the tale, Lily accepted the explanation, and John directed my daughter to find a non-existent item in the storage room before my return. Samantha, believing her father's words, ventured into the storage room. Unbeknownst to her, John closed the door from the outside. Oblivious to the unfolding situation, my daughter did not notice the door being shut. John, muttering about the nuisance being gone, left with Lily for their trip, unknowingly leaving my daughter trapped in the storage room. Upon John's return 4 days later, he cheerfully chatted with a saddened Lily. Blissfully unaware of the events in his absence, John was shocked when he saw the storage shed and remembered he had left his daughter behind. Panicking, Lily rushed to the shed, where an unidentifiable liquid seeped out from under the door. John, attempting to stop Lily, confessed the truth about leaving Samantha behind. Lily, in shock, tried to open the shed door, only to be halted by John. The revelation left her devastated. The realization that Samantha was left in the shed, contrary to what John had assured her, prompted Lily to blame him. John, trembling and admitting his mistake, faced Lily's accusations. Witnessing this, I finally spoke up, questioning John's actions. My voice, cold and filled with anger, sent chills down my spine. Even my daughter, standing beside me, mirrored the intense emotions. John, turning around to face us, was frozen in shock. "Sherry." Contrary to John's astonishment, Lily burst into tears upon seeing Samantha. Hugging Samantha tightly, Lily expressed relief that she was safe. Samantha, avoiding eye contact with John, reciprocated Lily's embrace. I couldn't help but wonder about the emotional toll these events had taken on the innocent children. I stood protectively in front of my daughter Samantha and niece Lily, yet John showed faint concern. "I'm glad you're safe," he muttered towards Samantha. "Glad she's safe after you left her behind." "What are you saying now?" "Samantha said she wanted to be with you." "And why are you here, Sherry? Weren't you on a business trip? You were supposed to return tomorrow." "Oh, so you thought you'd be back before I got home. Could it be that you often leave Samantha like this when I'm away?" John fell silent at my words. His silence was more affirming than anything else. I've already heard the story from Samantha. I'll be hearing it from Lily as well. Turning to Lily, who was still embracing Samantha, she met my gaze firmly and nodded as if she had made a decision. The fact that I was able to rescue my daughter Samantha was a stroke of sheer luck. The thought of what could have happened if my business trip dates hadn't changed sends shivers down my spine. On the day I was supposed to leave, I indeed boarded the Amtrak. However, I received a sudden notification that the trip was canceled. so I got off the train mid-journey and returned home. Since the trip was called off, I could return home directly, arriving earlier than my usual time. Finally, I would have a chance to talk with Samantha. I took a taxi from the station, rushing home. As I got out of the taxi and approached the front door, I heard a voice calling, "Mommy." Thinking Samantha had seen me and was running towards me, I turned towards the voice, only to be shocked. Samantha's voice was coming from inside the storage shed. "Samantha?" In a panic, I'd opened the shed door to find my daughter there, drenched in sweat and sobbing uncontrollably. At her feet lay the burst remnants of a water-filled bouncy ball I had given her. This toy was developed by John when he was still working at the toy manufacturer. I had given it to Samantha, hoping to cheer her up when she first started showing signs of distress. Apparently, she panicked when she realized the door was shut, either throwing or stepping on the ball, causing it to burst. The liquid seeping out of the shed was from this ruptured bouncy ball. The floor was also scattered with Samantha's old clothes. "What happened? Why are you in here?" I hugged my crying daughter and asked her. What she told me then ignited a fury in me, the likes of which I had never felt before in my life. "Samantha said you asked her to look for my jewelry. She's deeply shocked both from being left behind and being locked in." "Locked in?" The door wasn't locked. I thought she would come out on her own. Being suddenly shut in is frightening even for adults. It's not surprising she panicked and couldn't open it. And I've heard about the usual situation. Now I finally understand why Samantha started acting out. My husband would have noticed the cause. After all, he was the cause of it. After we started looking after Lily, John began to favor her, neglecting Samantha. My daughter felt increasingly lonely as John paid attention only to Lily. But Samantha, caring for me and my busy schedule, could only express her feelings in such a way. It seems she also knew Lily was troubled by John's behavior. The photo of them whispering might have been taken while they were discussing this. Samantha really wanted to talk to me about Lily and hoped I could help in some way. However, Samantha didn't have the right words to accurately convey this. Unsure of how to express it to me, Samantha's words to me were hesitant. Yet she cared deeply for Lily, despite feeling lonely herself. What a kind-hearted child she is. After hearing from Samantha, I immediately called John, but he didn't answer. No matter how many times I called, usually he would call back right away, and it was unusual for him not to answer. Something was wrong. Believing this, I reached out to my sister-in-law. During this conversation, I learned a shocking fact. John had told her he was going on a trip with Samantha and Lily. John had contacted my sister-in-law as soon as he found out about my business trip. Sherry is going on a long business trip. During that time, I thought of taking Samantha and Lily on a trip because Samantha might feel lonely. What do you think? My sister-in-law was also busy with work and felt guilty for not being able to spend much time with Lily. John lied that Samantha and Lily wanted to go to a theme park, and my sister-in-law agreed, thinking it would be good for Lily. Of course, I hadn't heard anything about this plan from John. Hearing this, I felt as if the blood had drained from my face. Could John have been planning to leave Samantha alone at home during this trip? I informed my sister-in-law that Samantha was actually at home. When I mentioned that I couldn't reach John, she said she would try calling him herself, and we ended the call. I thought something was off and checked around the house, and I was shocked. There were lots of prepared meals in the fridge, and the water heater for the bath was left on. Could it be that he prepared all this so Samantha could stay alone? That is, John had planned to leave our 5-year-old daughter alone for 4 days with just these arrangements. My sister-in-law managed to reach John, who was apparently at the theme park with Lily, and casually said, "I'll have to hang up. Our turn for the attraction is coming." She also received pictures of Lily alone at the park, confirming Lily's safety. Angry yet relieved about Lily's safety, my sister-in-law and I decided to wait for John and Lily's return. John, perhaps as an alibi, had sent me a picture of Samantha and Lily, which must have been taken previously at our house. My sister-in-law received photos of Lily playing at the theme park. There was even a fake story of the two having fun together to pretend for it. And so John, believing he had fooled us, returned home in high spirits, having completely forgotten about the daughter he left behind. Why did my husband want to go on a trip with only his niece so desperately? Why John wanted to go on a trip only with Lily was beyond understanding. His affection for his niece was one thing, but his actions were abnormal. I wasn't the only one who thought so. Really? What were you thinking? Leaving your own daughter behind to go on a trip with your niece? That's abnormal, sis. Why are you here? I've heard everything from Cher. My sister-in-law burst in out of breath, likely having run here straight from work. Seeing her, Lily left Samantha and ran to her aunt. Mom, Lily, I'm sorry. Then, for the first time, Lily told us everything about what my husband had done. As soon as we started looking after Lily, John began to pay attention only to her. According to what Samantha told me, it appeared so to Samantha. But in reality, it was more distressing for Lily. John had an unusual obsession with taking photos of Lily. At first, Lily agreed to John's request for photos, believing they were to be sent to her mother, and she smiled for the camera. However, over time, John's behavior began to escalate. He started making specific demands for poses, and Lily began to feel uncomfortable. But when Lily once refused and said no, John threatened her, saying he would tell her mother, making it seem like he was blaming Lily for not complying. Lily is a naughty girl for not listening. Maybe I should tell your mom that we can't look after you anymore. She would surely be troubled then. Manipulating Lily's desire not to upset her mom, John continued to take her pictures, and eventually he took her on a trip, just the two of them. I really didn't want to go on the trip. It was creepy when he held my hand. Hey, Lily, that's not true, right? You used to be happy with me, asking me to pick you up. Hearing this, my sister-in-law yelled, "How old was she, you're talking?" and hugged Lily tightly again. Lily, like Samantha, had been enduring John's behavior, not wanting to worry her aunt, and John had misunderstood this as Lily being fond of him. My sister-in-law tearfully apologized to Lily for not sensing the danger and agreeing to the trip so casually. She regretted her complacency for always having John look after Lily. "I'm sorry, Lily. If only I had been more careful." Lily shook her head in her mother's arms, said in a trembling voice that she never wanted to see John again. John began to panic pathetically at this. "Don't say that, Lily. I just wanted to show you affection. Stay away from Lily from now on." But then my sister-in-law demanded he delete the photos and snatched his phone from him. In his panicked state, however, upon seeing the photo folder, she was lost for words. There was an abnormal amount of photos of Lily saved. Lily's expressions in the photos seemed like forced smiles, but it was clear she was frightened. In retrospect, all the photos John sent never had Lily looking directly at the camera. John must have noticed the change in Lily's expressions too. That's why John only sent photos where Lily's expressions weren't clear, yet he let his desires run wild and took Lily away. Disgusting. I felt nauseated by John's abnormal behavior. My sister-in-law, holding the phone tightly, seemed frozen in place. We both shielded our daughters behind us, confronting John. There was no way I could forgive him for leaving Samantha behind, and I didn't want him near our daughters ever again. All feelings of affection had vanished in an instant. It's not like that. Listen to me. I love Lily, and of course, I love Samantha too. John continued to make excuses, only further frightening Samantha and Lily. I presented him with the divorce papers I had prepared during his trip, gathered our belongings, took Samantha, and left the house. I couldn't bear to share the same air with him for another moment. My sister-in-law and Lily followed us out. All that followed was my husband's sad screams. Afterward, I took my sister-in-law and Lily to their parents' house and informed them about John's behavior. When I mentioned leaving him with the divorce papers, my in-laws promised to handle everything from there. They assured us they would prevent John from approaching us again. Lily finally seemed to find some peace upon hearing their words. My sister-in-law and Lily decided to stay with my in-laws for the time being, planning to sort out work and school later. Though it likely meant Lily would have to change schools, we couldn't discount the possibility of John lurking around her school route. Samantha and I decided to return to my parents' home too. During John's trip, I had been managing work, household chores, and childcare alone. Thankfully, Samantha was a resilient child, and I felt confident that we could manage well on our own. Living without John, just the two of us seemed entirely feasible. Those hellish 4 days indeed contributed to my newfound confidence. For a while, we'll live at my parents' house, grateful for their kindness. But I plan to move closer to my workplace before Samantha starts elementary school. We started our new lives, but John was still stuck in the past. Thanks to my in-laws, I was able to finalize the divorce from John without ever having to see him. But he continued to call afterward and even showed up at my parents' house, despite being cut off by my in-laws from any contact with me, my daughter, and the residents of his parents' home. John pathetically tried to seek reconciliation. I can't imagine a life without Sher and Samantha. His words only instilled fear in me. I asked my parents to contact the police, who came and took away John, who was screaming at our doorstep. He was served a restraining order by the police and finally seemed to understand he was alone. All this destruction was his doing, and it was too late for regrets. I wondered how John, having been a stay-at-home dad, planned to live since then, but that was no longer my concern. Samantha had been down for a while after the incident, but she's finally starting to smile again. Though divorced from John, we still keep in touch with my sister-in-law and Lily, and their smiles are returning too, to overwrite the traumatic memories of the theme park with Lily. We are planning a trip there, just the four of us. I'm looking forward to creating many happy memories for Samantha and Lily. This is the last present I will ever give you. My husband shoves divorce papers to me. I've decided to marry someone else. So thank you for being a cash dispenser until now. The guy I have been with for so many years turns out to be a horrible person. This is a story of my revenge. My name is Jessica. I'm turning 50 this year. In fact, tomorrow is a little special day. I'll be living in debt for a long time and will finally finish paying it off. My husband Lance and I have worked really hard together. We got married 20 years ago. I was 30 and he was 35. He ran a liquor store that he inherited from his parents who had passed away. I, on the other hand, was an office worker. We met through an acquaintance and started dating with marriage in mind. I had one concern back then. What if he asked me to run the store with him? I was working as a financial consultant who advised on insurance and investment to individual and corporate clients at the time. I was getting paid better than average 30-year-olds and loved my job. I was studying for certification to take my career to the next level when he proposed to me. He said, "I know you have been working hard to get the certification. I want to support you in any way I can. I have enough staff at the store so I can manage it myself. You should pursue your dreams." His assurance was a catalyst for my decision to marry him. He was benevolent and always on my side. I truly wanted to build a life with such a man. As we agreed in the beginning, he focused on his business, and I focused on my work. We thought that our marriage was going well. About a year into it, he went to work, and I was spending my day off at home. When I was vacuuming under the bed, it caught a lot of papers. It had been less than 6 months since we moved in. I wondered why there was such clutter. I picked up a crumpled piece of paper and opened it. The header in bold letters jumped into my eyes. Reminder of payment. The total amount of the debt under Lance's name was $200,000. $200,000 was not $2,000, is it? My head started spinning. Why did he hide such a large amount of debt from me? I questioned him as soon as he got home that day. "What is this debt? What's going on?" "No, it's not what you think. It was left to me by my parents. That was not a personal debt, but rather on his liquor store. It was made by his parents, and when he took over the business, it also came along. It was secured by the land and the house we lived in, so he had no intention to renounce the inheritance. I understood that it was not his personal debt, but it was not something that could be left unattended. But this is a payment reminder. Aren't you paying back every month? I am. But sales fluctuate from month to month. Sometimes I can't pay them back during the slow month. I have to pay my staff first, so I've asked them to wait. That's when the letter came. At first, his explanation sounded to make sense, but it was definitely not a good idea to delay payment. The letter included the words "final notice." I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to freak out. Don't worry though. Business is on track, and we haven't been evicted from the house, right? That's true, but... I looked at him anxiously. Then he mentioned something unexpected. If you're so worried, why don't you help me pay it off? You are making quite a lot, aren't you? I wasn't comfortable with where he was going. It was not my store, and a husband and a wife were supposed to help each other. My debt is also yours. That's a bit sudden. Are you okay if my store went out of business? Many people would suffer if it was gone, you know. I guess he was right. His store had become an indispensable part of the community. It was located in the suburbs where there weren't many shops or supermarkets around. He was also selling fresh foods such as meat and fish and offered a home delivery service. I visited the shop several times, and it was always busy. Some customers stated that they were so grateful to have it in the neighborhood. Please, honey, I'll be focused on keeping my business rolling. Please help me pay off my debts. I respected the way he took his work seriously and devoted himself. I didn't want to see his store disappear. I didn't want that to happen for sure. Being married means that we support each other at all times. If you were struggling, it seems only natural for me to help him. Okay, I'll repay back as much as I can every month from my salary. You can concentrate on managing the store. I could help financially, but only he could run it. I was happy that he relied on me above all else. However, it was the beginning of a change in him. About 3 years had passed since I took over his debt. He often came home late. What were you doing until this late? You reek of alcohol. I just had a few drinks with my customers, honey. Did you make a payment this month? For some reason, he sounded condescending. I did last week. Why? The store depends on you. You'd better keep paying on time. Whenever he got drunk those days, he gave me an order. I had taken it as nonsense from a drunkard, but it started to prick my nerves when he did it repeatedly. He made it sound like it was normal for me to pay back his debt. By the way, Matt has a third kid now. I envy him. Matt was his friend from high school. He had his own business, just like Lance. His wife also worked in the store with him. I've been wanting to talk to you about that. I told him what I had been keeping to myself. Don't you think it's time for us to start a family? His reaction was very cold. What? Baby? My business has just started picking up, and we are still in debt. How can we be so irresponsible? That was his stance. I held back my annoyance. Matt has 3 children now, right? We can manage one too. His parents are still well, and his wife works in the store. They are different from us. I couldn't counter that. I'd always thought that I would have children when I got married. My dream was crushed easily, so until I pay off all your debts, we can't have a baby. Well, I guess that's how it's going to be. If you make a lot of money and pay off studies quickly, I will think about it. His mean smile disgusted me, but I felt impatient to pay off the debts as soon as possible. How blind I was. Even though it was an irrational demand, I was still occupied with the thought of starting a family and didn't even think about it. From then on, I worked tirelessly for Lance. I actively obtained qualifications, took promotional exams, and secured a salary increase. I started earning much more than women my age. I even made advance payments, but the debt didn't disappear so easily. I turned 40 before I knew it and had to give up on having children. I thought to myself that I still had my husband and thought he was enough. He relied on me. and I could do anything for him. As long as I still believed that, I remained happy. Lance started coming home later and later as the days went by. He sometimes came back in the morning. I was working in the store, and it was morning when I realized it. I had to go out with a customer, and the next thing I knew, the sun was out. When I saw him working so hard to protect the store, I felt that I had to do my best as a wife too. We were on the same boat, sailing for a better future together. The months and years went by, and the day finally arrived. I was going to make the last payment the next day. For the sake of the debt, I had to pass on all sorts of luxuries. I didn't need to do so anymore. I could finally spend my hard-earned money the way I wanted. I realized that ever since I got married, I had been thinking too much about money. We had never taken a vacation or even dined at a nice restaurant. We were still in our 50s. I hoped to finally enjoy such things from then on. On the day the last payment was due, I took a day off. I prepared a more opulent dinner than usual, complete with a bottle of wine and Lance's favorite chocolate cake, intending to celebrate a debt-free life together. When he returned from work, I laid everything out on the table, remarking, "Finally, it feels like it's been a long time." But the last 20 years have gone by so fast, haven't they, honey? His trembling and lowered head made me wonder if he was crying from happiness. However, to my shock, he burst into laughter in a way I had never heard before. "What the hell is going on? Are you okay?" My supposed husband declared something outrageous. "You are dismissed now. I'm grateful to you for the past 20 years. Thanks to you paying off all my debt, I'm a free man. Great job. I don't need you anymore." "What are you talking about?" I genuinely had no clue. He pulled out something from his bag. "This is my last present to you." Bold letters of a divorce petition stabbed my eyes. Proudly, he continued, "I've decided to marry someone else, so you are no longer of any use to me. Thanks for being my cash dispenser until now. You're getting remarried? Have you been cheating on me all this time?" I recalled his habitual late returns, citing work or socializing. While I toiled to pay off his debt, he was nowhere to be found. His expression remained smug. "I will never read that unfaithful. I have already found the next potential wife. I want to divorce you and marry her. That's why I have been waiting for you to clear my debt." Tears welled up at the absurdity. The feast I had prepared blurred before my saddened eyes. "Get the hell out of here." He handed me the divorce papers. My blood boiled faster than I could feel sadness or despair. "Okay, but you won't regret it." I forced out my voice. "No, I won't. Why would I regret divorcing an old hag like you?" "Old hag?" If I were her, he would be an old fart. Did he think he was still young? His misconception was so ridiculous that I regained composure and accepted the divorce papers. "I'm going to take this with me for now, and I'll be in touch." I packed my belongings and left the house. How could my 20 years of marriage come to such an easy end? Finally alone, I shed tears of emptiness and frustration. Later, I asked my attorney for a divorce agreement, sending it to Lance. I also requested a background report on his bride-to-be. Shortly after, he called me. "Hey Jessica, what the hell is this document?" He sounded furious. I could imagine his face turning bright red even over the phone. Contrasting his fury, I remained calm. "That is a divorce agreement. What about it?" "I know what it is. What I'm talking about is this loan agreement. Why do I have to pay you back?" He sounded distraught, yelling, "This is crazy. This is not right." Referring to the repayment of the loan between spouses during the marriage, he protested against returning the money I paid on his behalf. "This is ridiculous. You decided to do it out of your goodwill, didn't you? Why are you digging up the past?" "What do you mean? I did it as your wife. If we divorce, that's a different story." Regret hit him. He just realized it. When he asked for a divorce, I immediately thought of making him repay my head. My profession involved dealings with insurance and investments, giving me contacts with experienced attorneys. I consulted them right away. The total, including interest, was a little over $300,000. I was determined to have him pay me back precisely that. That was all I asked for. He grasped the seriousness, seeing the name of a locally famous attorney on the document. Ludicrously, he said, "You know that I don't have much money. Sell the store to fund it then. If I do that, I won't have anything left. You're only 55. You could still find a job if you wanted to. Give me a break." The conversation made no sense. I wanted to hang up, but there was one last thing to check. "How's it going with your new bride-to-be?" "None of your business." I burst out in laughter. It seemed like he was going through a lot. "Good luck." I was about to hang up. "Wait a minute. I've decided not to marry her. We can start over." For some reason, he pleaded with me. I yelled my last words and hung up. "Start over? Don't kid yourself. I don't want you. I had been married to such a man for 20 years. Did I look more ridiculous than him in the eyes of others? I respected him until the divorce. I had watched him work hard for the store and his customers. 20 years later, I realized he was just a fool. The mentioned remarriage started with innocent flirtation with a part-time university student, Melissa. "You are so cute, Melissa. Will you be my wife?" She played along, jokingly replying, "Well, I would think about it if you let me be a full-time housewife." The truth was, he believed she was serious. Marrying a man nearly 40 years her senior seemed like a mere joke to her. It turned horrifying when he persistently pressed her to marry him, leading her parents to intervene and obtain a restraining order against him. Reading the private investigation report, I laughed so hard I hyperventilated. When he came home late, I assumed he was working hard, unaware of the truth. Instead, he was hitting on young girls at bars and strip joints, boasting, "I'm surprisingly popular with young girls. I'm a salesman, so I have this easy-to-talk-to aura and get along with them. And I'm told that I look younger. Don't you think so?" The girls apparently cringed at his comments. With no use for his older wife and viewing me only as a cash dispenser, his misconceived self-image turned him into a somewhat laughable stalker who almost got in trouble with the police. Perhaps it would have been better if he had cheated on me. Unfortunately, he couldn't even find a mistress. The reason behind his pursuit of a young girl was his friend Matt having a grandchild. Matt recounted, "As soon as he saw my grandchild, he said he wanted to have a child himself. I scolded him, saying he shouldn't say such a thing. You had been paying his debt for him." He was absolutely mortified. "I'm glad I didn't spend my golden years with that man," I muttered. My divorce finalized, and despite unclear property division, he gave up due to my attorney's reputation. I wondered how such a gutless person had stayed in business. He sold the store to pay me back. Fortunately, just before the sale, his employees abandoned him. Customers frowned at him for giving up a family business. When they learned the reason was to pay his ex-wife, shock spread through the community. He got what he deserved when he demanded a divorce. A true story that sounded like a comedy circulated. Even if he hadn't sold the store, the bad publicity would have affected his business. Selling before bankruptcy was probably a blessing. The money wasn't enough, so he still works part-time to pay me back. Sometimes he messages, "It was all my fault. Can we get back together?" Even after blocking, he calls from different phones. "If you contact your ex-wife any further, we'll file a restraining order," warned my attorney. The calls stopped. He is terrified of the attorney. Guess what I do now? I'm a marriage counselor. Turning 50, I joined my My father has been expanding and generating profits within the company founded by my grandfather. Recently, he promised to transfer a luxurious villa, a mansion, to me. However, I've come to the realization that what's rightfully yours should also be mine as your husband. This mansion is now mine, and I plan to hire you as a housemaid. If you're not on board with that, well, you can always consider divorce. As it turns out, despite the mansion supposedly being in my name, my husband had clandestinely inscribed his own name on the legal papers. Does he genuinely believe that's acceptable? Does he comprehend the potential consequences of such actions? My name is Aaron, and while I don't intend to boast, I was born into a wealthy family. My father, the CEO of several companies, inherited the business from my grandfather, who initially started a small shop repairing and selling TVs and music systems. Over time, the company flourished, expanding into various branches and diversifying into the IT sector. My father's foresight, selling computers and accessories before they gained widespread popularity, proved to be a lucrative move. Besides IT, he ventured into real estate, collaborating with local businesses and actively contributing to community development. My mother served as the vice president of the company, and after studying it in college, I joined the family business. Despite the outward appearance of affluence, we didn't live as extravagantly as portrayed in TV dramas. My father believed in instilling good values, rejecting the notion that spoiling a child aids in their responsible growth. Our family home was spacious, and we had a maid, but as a child, I actively participated in household chores. Dining at fancy restaurants occurred infrequently, and our international travels were limited to once a year, with the majority being local trips. My school life seemed quite ordinary, and it would have been challenging for anyone to guess that my family was affluent. Due to my unassuming demeanor, I dated guys within my age group, just like any other girl. Among them, Michael, who later became my husband, was one of my colleagues at the same workplace. During those times, I worked as a sales representative and office manager at an IT-related shop, and Michael was also a sales rep there. I chose not to disclose that my father was the CEO to my coworkers, making it easier for Michael to approach me. I noticed that he was straightforward and had no reservations. Although I didn't seek extravagance, I'd always suggested places within Michael's budget. During our dates at restaurants, he would order generously, explaining that if there's extra, he'd eat it, opting for a cost-effective approach to enjoy a hearty meal. Some might have considered him a bit frugal, but I found it endearing. Unbeknownst to him, I earned several times more than he did, content with my fair compensation for the responsibilities I held. I unconsciously became accommodating. Michael, always keen on budget-friendly ways to satisfy his appetite, received my gestures with gratitude. During our dates, I'd often bought extra food or thoughtful gifts, knowing he would appreciate them. When shopping for clothes, I would add extra socks for him, and on occasions when I got a new bedspread, I'd include pajamas and a pillow for him. I genuinely enjoyed making him happy. Even when visiting his home, I willingly cooked for him and took care of the cleanup. Out of the blue, Michael proposed to me one day, expressing that there was no one better than me. At that moment, I hesitated, harboring reservations. After all, my father was the CEO of a major company, and he held a prominent position at my current workplace. I feared that if Michael were to discover this, he might reconsider our relationship. Deciding to take Michael to my parents' home for the first time, I aimed to introduce him to my family and disclose everything about our background. If he accepted it all, I would be more than willing to marry him. As Michael's inaugural visit to my family home approached, he appeared visibly nervous. However, my dad, though strict on occasion, generally exuded a calm demeanor. When I presented Michael as the man I was contemplating marrying, my father welcomed him with a warm smile, alleviating some of Michael's tension. Although surprised to learn about my father's CEO status, Michael managed to navigate the visit smoothly with my father's supportive demeanor. Upon leaving the house, Michael exclaimed about the enormity and magnificence of the residence, expressing gratitude for my father's kindness. He even suggested that we could get along well. When I casually mentioned my dad's ownership of additional buildings and a vacation home, Michael appeared more astonished. Despite the revelation, he resolved to marry me, the daughter of such a prominent man, and I agreed wholeheartedly. Eventually, we became a married couple. However, something bothered me. At the moment of accepting his proposal, I noticed a slightly mischievous grin on Michael's face for a split second. Dismissing it as his quirky way of smiling, I didn't dwell on it, but perhaps had I paid more attention, I could have averted the impending tragedy. As Michael and I moved into a typical, not overly luxurious apartment, he seemed to grasp the significance of my father's status. Yet I never explicitly disclosed my income, maintaining a modest lifestyle. Gradually, Michael's demeanor changed after settling in. While I balanced work and household responsibilities, he started demanding more. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he asked, "What's for dinner tonight?" In response, I informed him that I had prepared his favorite curry rice. However, to my surprise, he appeared dissatisfied as he sat on the sofa. Letting out a sigh, he expressed his desire for something like a prime beef steak once in a while. This caught me off guard, as he had never complained about my cooking before. I pointed out that prime beef was quite expensive, but he clicked his tongue in annoyance, insisting that, considering my father's earnings, indulging in prime beef occasionally should not be a big deal. Reluctantly, I agreed to get prime beef for the next day. Michael smirked, stating that we should be able to enjoy such things normally from now on. While my salary could afford such luxuries, my previous lifestyle had instilled a reluctance to spend so extravagantly. However, to avoid issues early in our marriage, I resigned myself to the decision to actually cook prime beef steak. Unfortunately, Michael's lavish tendencies did not stop there. He frequently requested expensive ingredients for meals and specified upscale restaurants when we went out. His cravings extended beyond food, manifesting in desires for a TV larger than 60 inches and even suggesting we should purchase a massage chair for the sake of relaxation after work. These remarks became more frequent, and I began to feel that it was getting out of hand. I questioned the need for such extravagant items, expressing my concern about the expenses involved. Frustrated, I finally retorted, asking him if he thought we were made of money. I challenged his extravagant lifestyle, stating that living so lavishly was unnecessary. In response, Michael made a displeased face and clicked his tongue again, expressing his discontent. He argued that, as the husband, he contributed to the household expenses and insisted that I should listen to him. However, his statements puzzled me, as his contributions, while appreciated, did not amount to a lavish sum. In fact, I contributed more, a fact I never disclosed to him. Despite my substantial financial input, he made these assertions without hesitation. This change in Michael's behavior left me questioning his mindset. He was not like this before, and I couldn't comprehend why he had changed at that moment. I found myself in a state of confusion, unable to comprehend Michael's recent behavior. In response to his audacious requests, I decided to temporarily appease the situation by telling him, "All right, I'll think about it." Little did I know that the explanation for his bold behavior would become apparent just a few days later. On that particular day, my father summoned me to the office of our shop where I worked, claiming that he had something important to discuss. While Michael was engrossed in his work, my father entered the office and initiated a serious conversation. He expressed uncertainty about how much longer he could continue as the CEO and hinted at the possibility of me taking over in the future. Furthermore, he mentioned transferring the vacation home to me. This vacation home, briefly mentioned to Michael earlier, resembled a large lodge located about a 30-minute drive away. It was a place where my father used to host gatherings with town shop owners, under the guise of meetings. Although such meetings were no longer held, the house was consistently ready to be lived in, maintained by a housekeeper. My father offered me the freedom to use the vacation home however I wanted. This proposition left me torn, as I had no concrete idea of how to utilize such a property. The vacation home boasted over 6,000 square feet, with a lavish garden surrounded by nature, akin to a mansion. Lacking the social connections to host significant parties, I contemplated keeping it as an asset. I conveyed to my father that I would positively consider his proposal but needed more time to make a decision. He assured me there was no rush and left a contract on the desk before departing the shop. Returning home after work, I leaned towards accepting the mansion, intending to give it further thought the next day. However, the following day brought an unexpected turn of events. Upon arriving at work, I discovered that Michael, who typically arrived before me, was absent from the shop. Intrigued, I entered the office only to find him there. Instinctively, I asked, "What are you doing here?" To my surprise, he flashed a document in my face, stating, "I overheard the conversation about the mansion yesterday. Sounds like an amazing deal, right?" Dumbfounded by Michael's audacious move, I reluctantly signed the document he flaunted, a contract my father had handed me just the day before. Shockingly, Michael had inscribed his own name on it. I was utterly taken aback and couldn't help but express my disbelief. "What on earth are you doing?" I questioned him, but Michael, without a hint of remorse, casually responded, "Why not? Your dad said he's giving away an amazing mansion, right? If you won't decide, I figured I'd take it." He said this with a smirk, but there was no way I could accept it. Persistently, I pleaded with him, emphasizing the house's worth of $4 million and my father's intention to give it to me. However, Michael dismissed my concerns with a nonchalant laugh. $4 million bucks? Dan, that's impressive. Think about it. I have the right to this mansion because you're my wife, and I'm your husband, so I have a right to what's yours. Moreover, your dad really likes me. He probably won't have any complaints. So from today, this villa is my house. If you live in a wealthy house, you've got to make use of it. How about I hire you as a maid in this mansion? If you have any complaints, I'll divorce you anytime, he confidently declared. It was at that moment when I recalled Michael's past actions and words, and everything finally clicked. He seemingly had no qualms about taking from others, even if it meant practically stealing, without feeling guilty. During our dating days, I'd always showered him with gifts, but he never reciprocated. My giving nature might have corrupted him, leading him to believe that what was mine was automatically his. My dad's kindness to Michael likely made him feel my father was easy to manipulate, and perhaps he perceived me as even more gullible. With a plan forming in my mind, I decided to confront him. I declared, "Fine then. This mansion is yours, but I'm not going to be your maid. Let's get a divorce. Take care." After that, I returned to my job and, during my lunch break, called a divorce lawyer to initiate the process. Michael, seemingly unfazed, responded with bravado, claiming he was fine with it and canceling the lease on his current place. Little did he know that tragedy was about to hit him, and he just hadn't realized it yet. Later, I went back to my parents' place and shared everything with my father. From that point on, everything unfolded according to my plan. A few weeks later, Michael called me in a state of panic, having received an enormous bill. While his shock was understandable, it was only fair, considering the fixed property tax on the $4 million house he had claimed as his own. I casually informed Michael that he should expect to pay around that much for the property tax. However, he appeared utterly clueless, lacking knowledge that paying tax on owned property is common. Normally, my father would have covered the tax if he had received the property, but upon hearing the entire story, my usually calm father was furious. Despite my warnings about my father's strict nature, he declared he can have it if he can afford it, and accepted the property transfer to Michael. To be honest, a part of me wanted Michael to learn a tough lesson, and there was no way he could afford the hefty amount. Frustrated with Michael's persistent pleas, I decided to deliver a final blow. The annual property tax, I revealed, amounted to about $60,000. It dawned on me that Michael always had a mindset of trying to take advantage of his friends, possibly driving them away and leaving him without anyone to teach him common sense. Acknowledging that I may have been a bit unreasonable, I admitted that my once cute perception of Michael had drastically changed. Without any sympathy left, I hung up the phone. Subsequently, Michael couldn't sustain living in the house and faced forced eviction. Realizing he couldn't afford it, my father reverted the property deed back to my name, incurring the gift tax himself. Meanwhile, Michael faced severe consequences. He was fired from his job and charged with unlawfully changing the property deed. He received scoldings from his parents and was shunned by acquaintances. Now jobless and friendless, He barely scraped by in a rundown apartment, working odd jobs. His parents were even considering disowning him. As for me, I've been gradually preparing to take over my father's company. My father once told me that success in business doesn't come from looking for shortcuts. Reflecting on the fact that I almost married Michael, I deeply understand the truth in his words. Inspired by my father's greatness, I push forward every day in my involvement in running the business.
Ever since we exchanged vows, my husband, a classic mama's boy, had been noticeably absent from household chores. His dependence on me became painfully clear when I mentioned an upcoming business trip. Panic set in as he exclaimed, "Who will take care of me while you're gone?" After a heated argument, I left for my week-long journey. When I returned, I found a note next to completed divorce papers. It read, "Since you abandoned the housework, I'm going back to my parents. Consider the divorce papers and think it over." Rage boiled inside me at his audacity to threaten divorce, but as I calmed down, I began to see a glimmer of clarity. Perhaps this was the push I needed. Maybe a divorce wasn't such a bad idea after all. Resolved, I filed the papers the very next day. The following morning, my astonished husband stormed in, demanding to know where the divorce papers were. When I told him I had filed them, he broke down, utterly baffled and crying uncontrollably. "My name is Grace, and at 32 years old, I've been married just over a year. After college, I diligently climbed the ranks at a prominent company. Approaching my 30s without a romantic partner, my parents pressured me to settle down, leading me to reluctantly join a dating agency. That's where I met Edward, a soft-spoken man a few years younger than me who worked at a mixed firm. We connected over several dates, and his respectful demeanor made me think he was the one. When he proposed, I was overjoyed, envisioning a life together. However, our marriage unveiled challenges I hadn't anticipated. After our engagement, during a visit to my parents, they impressed upon us that marriage is a lifelong commitment. "Grace, always be there for Edward," they advised, and I nodded while Edward listened intently. Next, we visited Edward's parents. His father, Arthur, welcomed me warmly, saying, "I've heard so much about you from my boy. It's great to finally meet you." His mother, Michelle, was more reserved, scrutinizing me before asking, "Is this the one?" Edward confidently replied, "Yep, Mommy. I want to marry her." I was taken aback by his use of Mommy and Michelle's bluntness. Arthur quickly stepped in, apologizing for her directness and assuring me, "We're very happy about your marriage, but just so you know, Edward has had it pretty easy here. He might be a bit of a challenge." I reassured them, "I adore Edward's gentle side, and I know we'll support each other." Arthur turned to Edward, urging him to step up and keep me happy. Edward nodded earnestly, and not long after, we celebrated our union with a low-key wedding. To our delight, my parents gifted us a condo, marking the beginning of our married life. However, it soon became evident that Edward was unaccustomed to household responsibilities. One morning, while I was busy with laundry and preparing breakfast, Edward's alarm rang at 8, yet he continued to sleep soundly. Despite my efforts to wake him, he wouldn't budge. Finally, I pulled off his covers and gave him a gentle shake. Slowly, he opened his eyes, groggily exclaiming, "Wow, it's 8:10 already. Why didn't you wake me up?" I reminded him that I had tried and that his alarm was blaring too. "Now please eat your breakfast." As he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the table, he immediately complained about the eggs. "Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over," he demanded, caught off guard while I hung laundry. I struggled to hold back my irritation and snapped, "Then don't eat it. Why would you say that? And this coffee is scorching hot. Mommy always got the eggs and coffee just right." All right, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hurriedly, leaving his plate on the table as he rushed toward the restroom. "Wait up, you know you should clean up after yourself." I called after him, but he dismissed my concerns. "Gee, I'm short on time." Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to clean the dishes while picking out my outfit. Then he called out again, "Grace, over here. Help with my tie." There he stood, tie hanging limp-lie around his neck, looking utterly helpless. "Seriously, you can't even tie your tie? What did you do before we got married?" "Mommy always did it," he replied sheepishly. With a deep exhale, I tied his tie, and somehow we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never helped with any housework, and it felt like I was juggling everything while babysitting him too. Every time an issue arose, it was always, "Mommy did it this way," or "With Mommy, it went like that," always referencing his mother, Michelle. This pattern dragged on for a year, and as the pressures mounted, thoughts of divorce began to creep into my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my thoughts, tempering my frustrations. However, an unexpected hiccup at work led to a week-long business trip starting the next day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly surprised. "Hold up, a business trip for a whole week? It's out of my hands. Work's calling," I explained. "No way. Who's going to cover for you here for a week?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "You'll have to step up. It's about time you got a grip on the household duties," I responded, and he set down his controller, locking eyes with me. Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband in the house? Are you just bailing on that? His question was steeped in outdated expectations. Seriously, that's such old school thinking. We both have jobs. We should be a team, I countered. That's not how I see it. Mommy was always on top of things at home, he retorted. I couldn't help but point out, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, it's kind of odd hearing an adult man constantly talk about Mommy. He bristled at my words. What's your deal? Taking shots at me and my mommy? I'm not, but let's be real, you're a mama's boy. This is how you see me. You think you can talk to me like that? His defensiveness escalated, and I felt my frustration peak. Face it, you're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help, you can't even tie your tie, and you won't lift a finger around the house. You're constantly comparing me to your mom. For once, handle your stuff. Really? You're going to come at me like that? That's why I was iffy about marrying someone older. Should have sided with Mommy and chosen a younger, perkier girl, he shot back. His words struck a nerve, and our conversation spiraled into a major blowout. Even joking, you shouldn't say stuff like that. We're married, I said, trying to anchor the conversation to the commitment we had made to each other. The tension was palpable, revealing the deep rifts that had formed in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated argument, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, "You can't possibly want a divorce, can you? You wouldn't want to be labeled divorced. And think about what your dad said about sticking together." Then, with a sharp edge, he added, "Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously considering a divorce." With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the idea of divorce lingered in my mind, a thought I had previously wrestled with, fearing I would disappoint my parents. But now it seemed like a viable option to consider seriously. Heavy with these thoughts, I went to bed. The next day, I woke early to prepare for my trip. The fallout from our argument still weighed heavily on me, but I had work commitments to attend to. I nudged Edward, who was still curled up under the covers. "I'm heading out. You'd better wake up or you'll be late for work." His response was a sleepy mumble, unintelligible and dismissive. Rolling my eyes, I left. A few hours later, a text from him popped up on my phone. "You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip?" I quickly replied, "I did wake you up, and yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week." He read my message but didn't reply. Mid-trip, I decided to call my parents to update them on Edward's behavior and share my growing inclination toward divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, unsure how they would react to the possibility of our marriage ending. The call was going to be difficult, but I needed their advice and support. Their response took me by surprise. "We had no idea he behaved like this. Take your time to think, but don't force yourself to stay in a situation that isn't right. Always remember, we're in your corner, no matter what you decide." Their words of unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my business trip, I felt a mix of clarity and determination. I knew a serious conversation with Edward was inevitable. If he didn't show any signs of change, I was ready to consider divorce more seriously. My mind buzzed with thoughts as I walked into our house late in the evening, only to find Edward wasn't home yet. As I looked around, a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table caught my attention. The note read, "Since you ditched the housework, I'm heading back to my folks. Check out the divorce papers and think things over." My initial reaction was rage. How dare he threaten me with divorce? but as my anger subsided, I began to see the situation differently. Maybe this was a sign that ending things might not be such a bad idea after all. With that realization, I decided to file the papers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. That evening, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The next morning, as I enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, the door swung open and in walked Edward, clearly upset.
"Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's gotten into you?" he demanded, his temper flaring. Then, noticing the empty spot where the divorce papers had been, his expression shifted from anger to shock. "Hold on, where are the divorce papers?" "Oh, I filed them," I replied calmly. "You did what?" He looked as if he had been slapped. "You went through with it. Thanks for signing them. It made everything smoother," I said, trying to keep my composure. "You can't be serious. Did you really go all the way? Have you lost your mind?" he exclaimed, unable to hide his astonishment at my decisiveness. Seeing how composed I remained sent him into a complete frenzy. "That's it. I'm calling my parents." "Sure, knock yourself out," I replied, unfazed by his threat. I knew I had made the right decision for myself. An hour after the confrontation, I felt a sense of clarity settling in. When Edward's parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment, Michelle immediately spotted me and dramatically exclaimed, "You, how could you just divorce Edward like that? What's wrong with you?" I replied coolly, "If he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready to go, doesn't that suggest he wanted out? Is that a problem? How can you be so bold when you're just his wife?" she shot back. Before the situation could escalate, Arthur intervened, his voice firm. "Enough." The room fell silent as he turned to me. "Grace, can you walk us through what happened?" I agreed and began to detail the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip, and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went with it. I maintained eye contact with Arthur, hoping to convey the depth of my frustration. Just as I finished, Edward interjected, "Mom, Dad, come on, can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off." Michelle quickly sided with Edward. "Oh, Edward, my poor baby, she's being so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now." "There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now," I stated firmly. Michelle's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to respond. But once again, Arthur cut her off. "Zip it, Michelle." He then turned to me, apologizing for Edward's behavior. Then facing Edward, whose eyes were wide with surprise, Arthur continued, "You bonehead. I knew you had issues, but this, using divorce papers as a threat, unbelievable. You had it coming." Michelle tried to interject, but Arthur wouldn't let up. "It's partly on you, Michelle. You spoiled him. Watch out. If you keep this up, I might divorce you too." The tension in the room was palpable as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle speechless. After the intense discussion, Michelle appeared visibly shaken, her mind lingering on Arthur's unexpected threat of divorce. She murmured to herself, troubled. Arthur then turned his attention back to me, his expression marked by sincere regret. "Grace, I deeply regret the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's clear he has a lot to learn. Please move on and find happiness in your life," Arthur implored, his concern genuine. I thanked Arthur for his understanding and watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It didn't take long for the news to spread through our circle. Arthur had decided to sever financial and emotional ties with Edward, a drastic move aimed at pushing him towards self-sufficiency. Soon after, Edward's life spiraled downward. He moved into a modest, somewhat neglected apartment, his first experience living truly on his own. The transition was anything but smooth. His new home quickly descended into chaos, mirroring his disorganized personal life. With no one to rely on and a habit of tardiness, he soon found himself unemployed, unable to adhere to a schedule. Meanwhile, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always meddled in Edward's affairs, crossed boundaries one too many times, resulting in a serious fallout with Arthur. This ultimately led to their separation. Michelle moved in with Edward, and together they struggled to find stability, scraping by with low-end jobs. Their lives became a series of unfortunate events and poor decisions with no clear path to improvement. In stark contrast, my life took a different turn. Free from the daily stresses and emotional drain of my relationship with Edward,
I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt surprisingly spacious and full of potential. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself to my career. The absence of Edward's negative influence allowed me to excel at work, and my professional life flourished as a result. Feeling liberated and optimistic, I embraced my newfound independence. My living space transformed into a true sanctuary where I could relax and plan for the future. The improvement in my work life was palpable. Each day brought a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. The contrast between my thriving existence and Edward and Michelle's downward trajectory was stark. While they were no longer a part of my life, the lessons learned from our time together resonated deeply, reinforcing my commitment to personal growth and happiness.
Finally, free from any more baggage. Today marks the beginning of our life together with my parents at my house. However, as soon as my parents passed away, my husband, who had demolished our family home, dropped a bombshell on me. Standing in front of the now non-existent house, he declared, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind too? Come to our house with the inheritance. Quick." His words left me dumbfounded, and I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ah, I see. That's what this was all about. Perplexed, my husband, Howard, and my in-laws looked at me incredulously. "What? Why are you laughing?" I revealed the truth to them. My name is Deborah Jackson. I was born into an ordinary salaried worker family. I married Howard at 29, raised 2 children, and now, at 55, I expected a quiet life with my husband. But life took an unexpected turn. I recounted the challenges of caring for my ailing parents, particularly my mother's battle with cancer. Despite my efforts, my husband's reaction to living with my sick mother was unexpected and less than supportive. I suggested living with my mother for her sake, but Howard was reluctant. His complaints about meals, cleaning, and laundry were hurtful. Despite the challenges, we moved to my family home to care for my mother, even though Howard's initial attitude remained unchanged. As time passed, my mother's health deteriorated, leading to her hospitalization and eventual passing. Despite the emotional turmoil, Howard's lack of support during the funeral preparations left me deeply disappointed. In times like these, one wishes for their spouse's support. However, Howard was off to the side with his parents, not helping with the funeral preparations. Even during the funeral, he remained at the back of the relatives section. "Howard, I wish you would sit in the family area." I couldn't help but wish for the support that never came. When I suggested that Howard should sit with me in the family area during my mother's funeral, he responded, "No, I'm fine here. I'm not a blood relative after all." His mother, who was listening, interjected, "He's your husband, but not your mother's son, right? Howard is my son, so he's an outsider. An outsider, that's right. Howard's parents are just us. Deborah should sit in the family area alone." Even his parents echoed the sentiment, stating that Howard should not be in the family area. While seating arrangements for family members may vary by region, in our area, it's customary for sons-in-law to sit in the family area. Predictably, with Howard not in the family area, distant relatives started whispering and speculating about our relationship. After the funeral, we returned home with my brother's family, children, Howard, and his parents. Despite their insensitive remarks, I thanked Howard's parents for coming and served them coffee. However, their callousness reached new heights when they casually remarked about the condolence money being tough on them, implying relief at the end of the financial burden with my mother's passing. Stunned by their words, I forced a smile and left the room. Overhearing Howard and his parents' conversation, I learned more about their true feelings. Howard complained about living with someone else, and his parents joined in mocking me. It wasn't the first time. They had always been disrespectful, even during our marriage. Reflecting on their lack of concern during my father's funeral and mother's death, I questioned Howard's behavior as a person. I realized that I had been overly considerate of him, feeling guilty for imposing the living arrangement. Angry and resentful, I silently listened to their laughter and chatter. Later, in a conversation between Howard and his parents, they openly disapproved of my defiance regarding my mother's belongings. When they tried to take my mother's bag, I firmly refused, stating my intention to distribute her keepsakes among family members later. This led to a heated argument, with Howard and his parents leaving angrily, labeling me an outsider. Despite explaining the situation to everyone, Howard didn't return home for some time. When he finally did, he surprised me by showing concern and suggesting a trip for me and the kids, even providing travel vouchers. Though unexpected, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, including gratitude and confusion, at this unexpected gesture from Howard. I wonder if your father felt guilty, I said with a laugh as I decided to gratefully accept the travel vouchers from Howard. Well, I'll beat off then. Yeah, take your time. Since you're at it, stay over at the kids' places, Howard suggested. I can't be away that long, I replied. Just go. I'll relax at my parents' house. Don't worry about me, Howard said, sending me off with those words. Julia was happy to have me over. So before the trip, I visited Julia's and then Luke's homes, having been unable to visit while caring for my mother. I helped out a bit by making and freezing some meals for them. Mom, you don't get to relax at all, but thank you. It really helps. They both expressed gratitude for my home-cooked meals. This was all thanks to Howard's suggestion. Then came the long-awaited trip, and I spent a relaxing time at the hotel with my children. It seemed to heal much of the fatigue and sorrow from caregiving and losing my parents. I was away for nearly a week, but both kids returned to their homes with bright smiles. That was fun. We should thank Dad once in a while, Julia suggested. Really? Once in a while? But I wonder if he's up to something, I laughed, half-jokingly. Don't say that. Your father must have had his reasons, Julia replied. I laughed as well, planning to share the memories with Howard and start afresh in our married life. However, upon arriving home, I was at a loss for words. What's going on? The house is... I looked around in confusion, checking my location. Despite being a familiar place, our family home was gone. Then Howard appeared from nowhere, with his parents behind him, smirking at my dumbfounded expression. Howard, what's the meaning of this? I asked. Howard, like his parents, replied with an eerie smile. Finally, the baggage is gone. From today, we'll be living with my parents at my house. What are you talking about? I retorted calmly to Howard's arrogant statement. Then Howard spoke. Lost your mind? Your family home has been demolished. Come to our house with the inheritance. Already, everything you inherited belongs to Howard. I realized what had happened. The disappearance of my house was Howard's doing, all for the sake of inheritance. Despite being overwhelmed with frustration and sadness, I couldn't let Howard have his way. No way, I thought to myself. I burst into laughter at their smirking faces. What? Why are you laughing? What a strange woman. Has she gone mad? My mother-in-law looked at me as if I were something eerie. I faced them and spoke up. Don't you guys know? Know what? I then said to Howard, first of all, I didn't inherit a single penny, so there's no inheritance. I started laughing again after saying this. Maybe they thought they had become rich through inheritance. Their wild imaginations and actions were simply laughable to me. What do you mean? Explain yourself? Howard demanded an explanation, but I remained silent. I thought there was no need to enlighten them before that. I'm not going to live with strangers. If you want to live together, do it alone. Ignoring Howard's question and rejecting his initial proposition, my mother-in-law flared up in anger. You helped with your parents' household, but you won't do ours. You know why I did that, right? I agreed to live together, didn't I? I said we didn't need to live together, but you chose to do so because you didn't want to do housework. My rebuttal left Howard and my mother-in-law biting their lips in frustration. And demolishing my family home on your own. There are things you can and can't do, I yelled at them on the spot, then left the scene. Behind me, Howard's voice called out, "Where are you going?" However, I didn't turn back. I had to secure a place to sleep for the night, and I didn't want to see Howard's face. I immediately consulted a lawyer. It couldn't be that easy to demolish a house. The house was still in my mother's name. When I wondered which company had taken the job, an unbelievable truth came to light. Howard and my father-in-law had directly demolished the house themselves. They had meticulously prepared, enlisting the help of acquaintances from my father-in-law's demolition company and renting heavy machinery. Moreover, they had given me the travel vouchers to drive me out. The realization of being utterly deceived brought tears to my eyes and filled me with frustration. Is there any way to punish the three of them? I asked the lawyer through tears, and he smiled kindly. Your husband, who demolished the house registered under your mother's name without permission, can be charged with criminal damage and sued for compensation. Let's start by demanding a proper apology from your husband and his parents. I nodded at his words, and the lawyer promptly started the proceedings. A few days later, an irate call came from Howard. What's this letter of demand about? Oh, you received it. Since you destroyed our important house, you'll have to compensate for it. Compensate. I told you we were moving into the family home. I demolished an unused house for you. You should be grateful, not demanding compensation. Just bring your inheritance and come back home. Howard arrogantly insisted. Grateful for being demolished? Really? And about the inheritance coming home? There's none to bring since I didn't inherit anything. I shouted back over the phone. Howard fell silent, seemingly stunned by my outburst. The reason I laughed when the house was demolished was precisely this. I had a whole year to spend with my mother. It was obvious we would have discussed the inheritance. Then I said, I don't need anything. Give it all to my brother. Thus, all cash and securities were inherited by my brother. He said that I should get the house since he lived far away and couldn't manage it. If I wasn't going to live there, it could be rented out to someone else. That was the plan for me to inherit the house anyway. Either you and your father restore the family home to its original state or pay the amount written there. This amount, I'm being kind enough to suggest a settlement. If you can't pay, I'll file a police report and sue you, I spoke firmly. Sorry, I didn't think you'd be so angry. Of course, Howard replied. I'm angry. Howard began making excuses. He thought that as long as the family home was there, he couldn't live with his parents, especially since his father had always wanted to live with us. My father-in-law was fond of Luke and seemed to have wanted to live with him. He had refused to live together back then because it would have made commuting difficult, but his parents seemed to think I was the one opposed to it. So it turns out that Howard had convinced his parents to agree to this plan by demolishing my family home and making them believe I would move in with the inheritance. But even knowing this now, there's no way I can forgive it. So please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. Dad is remorseful too. If he's truly remorseful, then he'll agree to the settlement. I said this and hung up the phone. Howard kept calling me and sending messages to apologize. If you're sorry, then hurry up and transfer the money. I pushed Howard away with these words. I knew our family home couldn't be restored, but there was no other way to alleviate these unbearable feelings. Afterward, I stayed at Julia's house. My brother's family and my children knew about this. Even though my brother must have been angry about our family home being demolished without his consent, he said, I won't interfere, but I'll lend a hand. Do what you think is right, Deborah. Everyone condemned Howard's actions and supported me. A month passed without any payment for the damages or compensation. During that time, there was no contact from Howard. I couldn't keep relying on Julia's hospitality forever. I wanted to receive the money soon and at least establish a stable living situation. But contrary to my wishes, something unbelievable happened. It was revealed by a comment from Julia. This apron looks a lot like Grandma's, she muttered while showing me her smartphone screen. I was shocked when I saw the screen. It was a product page on a flea market app. The item Julia thought resembled my mother's apron was a unique piece I had made for my mother. What? This is Grandma's apron. I made it, so there's no mistake, really, Julia said and hurriedly checked other pages. The seller seemed to have registered recently, with no transactions or ratings yet. As I checked the content of the nearly 30 items listed, I was shocked to find that they all belonged to my mother. I immediately realized it must be Howard's doing. No one else but Howard, who had demolished the house, could have taken my mother's belongings. I called Howard right away. "What's this about the app, Howard?" Howard responded, sounding annoyed. Thinking he was playing dumb, I'd angrily confronted him. "Don't play dumb. You're selling Mom's belongings, aren't you? Cancel the listings right now." Howard sounded panicked as he replied, "What? No, it's not me. Who else would do such a thing? I'm coming over to get everything back." I hung up and immediately went to Howard's parents' house with Julia. Upon arriving at Howard's parents' house, I immediately called out to Howard. He came out to meet us at the entrance, where I confronted him. "I don't know anything about it," Howard said. "Dad, tell the truth." Julia, supporting me, also pressed Howard for answers. He was visibly flustered. While this was happening, Howard's parents, perhaps realizing we were there, showed up too. "Oh, Julia, you're here?" She smiled happily upon seeing Julia. Julia, clearly upset, spoke to her grandmother. "Tell Dad to tell the truth. The truth. It seems like Dad is selling the stuff Grandma passed away." With hearing this, my mother-in-law laughed. Howard looked troubled and kept repeating, "It's not me." Then my mother-in-law spoke loudly. "Howard's selling them? That can't be true." But because I'm the one selling them, I felt the blood drain from my face at her words. Howard must have known. He looked at his mother with a "this is bad" expression. Julia was stunned, but my mother-in-law seemed cheerful. "What did you say? It's quite a task, you know. Packaging has to be done carefully, and the photos need to be taken well." She talked about the app as if it was a fun hobby, not realizing she was selling stolen items. I struggled to contain my anger. "Cancel the listing. That's not something Grandma can just sell." Julia, red-faced and teary-eyed, appealed to her grandmother, but my mother-in-law seemed displeased. "What's the big deal? I found a fun hobby. I use what I can, and the rest makes a nice little income. It's good for preventing dementia after all. I'm the only grandma left. And Julia, you want me to stay healthy and live long, right?" My mother-in-law said this nonchalantly. It was clear she wouldn't listen to our pleas. But if talking won't work, we'll have to take action. "Let's go home, Julia." "But it's okay." I left the house, dragging Julia with me. And so, I rushed to the police station. I had not planned to file a report about the house being demolished, but theft was a different matter altogether. When I reported the theft and unauthorized sale of my mother's belongings to the police, they promptly took action. The flea market app company cooperated, and my mother-in-law's account was suspended. This ensured that no more items would be sold. On my way back from the police station, I called Howard. "I had your mother's account suspended. You knew about this, didn't you? You're complicit." "No, I've filed a police report. Please cooperate with the investigation." Howard became frantic at my words. "What? We're family, aren't we? Please withdraw it. Strangers, right? I still haven't received any compensation or damages for the house being demolished, and I see no remorse from you." I was angry, and Howard was at a loss for words. But I am not heartless. Despite everything, I had shared a life with Howard for a long time. Sighing, I realized that there might still be a long road ahead to resolve all these issues. I said, "I'll wait for the money, but I won't forgive the theft. Everything must be returned. And Howard, your father looked very ill. Has he been to the hospital?" "What? I'm not heartless, so I'm just letting you know." I said this and hung up the phone. I had seen my father-in-law earlier, and he hadn't spoken much. He was much thinner than when I last saw him a few months ago, and his face was pasty and unnaturally dark. It was clear that he was not in good health, but I doubted that the family had noticed. My mother-in-law was nonchalantly trying to sell stolen items, and Howard was only bold towards me. That parent and child simply lacked any sense of consideration for others. The next day, my father-in-law called me. I thought he might thank me, but it was the exact opposite. "You're treating me like a sick person, planning to dump me in a hospital to get rid of me, huh? I have to protect Howard and your mother from you. I'm not going to any hospital," he scolded. I was concerned for him, yet this was how he responded. "I apologize if it was out of line. I was just concerned, I'm not weak and short-lived like your parents. Don't patronize me." I was angry at his words, but a few days later, he apparently felt unwell and went to the hospital. The diagnosis was terminal cancer. Howard called me in a panic. "Dad has terminal cancer. What should I do?" I snorted. "That's none of my concern. Remember what you said when I suggested the hospital. You said you're not weak and short-lived like my parents. Deal with it yourself. How can you be so heartless?" "Who's the heartless one? Did you ever say a kind word when my mother was sick? Reflect on your own actions." I said this and ended the call. As expected, my father-in-law passed away not long after. As a human being, I didn't want to harbor negative feelings towards someone who had passed, but recalling all that had been done and said, I couldn't shed a single tear. After the funeral, a will was found. Despite his claims of not being short-lived, my father-in-law had been thoroughly prepared. The house is to be inherited by my grandson Luke. The rest of my estate is to be divided between my wife and eldest son, it stated. I was surprised to see Luke's name. My father-in-law had always favored Luke, expressing a desire to live with him. Now he must have wanted Luke to live in the house even after his passing. For Luke, this was an unwelcome burden. Renounce the inheritance. "You don't want that house, do you?" I told Luke, but he was actually pleased to inherit the house. Inheriting the house would only mean paying inheritance taxes, with no real benefit for Luke. However, if he was happy with it, it wasn't my place to say anything. As per his grandfather's will, Luke inherited the house. My mother-in-law was delighted and paid the inheritance tax. "He's our heir, after all," she said. Well, that wasn't wrong. I felt a bit down, feeling like Luke was taken from me. But then something unbelievable happened. Come to our house, responding to Howard's message, I immediately went to his parents' house. There, like me once stood, my mother-in-law and Howard, frozen in front of their house. On the property, there were heavy machines, trucks with the demolition company's name, and workers all demolishing the house. What's going on? It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it, right? Luke, who appeared out of nowhere, seemed pleased watching the house being demolished. "Luke, what are you doing? Stop it right now." "Even if I stop now, we can't live there anyway, Mom." "Luke, what have you done?" My mother-in-law and Howard pleaded with Luke, but he just laughed. "Have you forgotten what Grandpa and Dad did to Mom, Luke? Grandma, you were horrible to Mom too, right? Did you apologize?" Luke, his smile gone, glared sharply at his mother and Howard. They fell to their knees as the machines continued to loudly demolish the house. I felt relieved seeing the scene. Later, Howard, having finally received the inheritance, paid the compensation and damages. It seemed that Luke had recovered the stolen items my mother-in-law took from my mother, and they were safely returned to me. "Mom, you've got me and Julia," Luke said, and I finally shed tears of relief. Howard and his mother lost their house and were left with no money, now living again in company housing. Howard and I had moved out of the company housing, and now Howard, along with his mother, had returned, becoming the talk of the town. A wife of Howard's colleague, with whom I am on good terms, contacted me, and I explained everything honestly. They'll likely live uncomfortably in the company housing now, but it's their own doing. Furthermore, with Howard's retirement, the two will need to save up for their future living arrangements. I might occasionally ask friends for updates on their situation, just for a story to share. I continued to stay at Julia's house, but Luke is now planning to get married and build a house. The land from his parents' house sold for a decent amount, surprisingly making the demolished house useful. "Mom, come live with us." Luke even invited me to live with them. His soon-to-be wife welcomed the idea warmly. I couldn't impose on Julia forever, so I gratefully accepted Luke's offer. I resolved to be a different kind of mother-in-law, hoping to live happily with my new family.
Hi, I'm Shirley, a 31-year-old office worker. A year ago, I married Mason, a man I met on a blind date. After a year and a half of dating, he proposed. Settling down had always been my dream, so even though the proposal felt a bit hasty, I said yes. In hindsight, I realized I should have taken a more cautious approach. Not long after our wedding, Mason made a surprising decision to switch jobs. When I asked him about it, he explained that his previous position didn't allow him to fully showcase his skills. What stunned me even more was his announcement that he had already resigned and would be leaving by the end of the month. Thankfully, he found another job quickly, but it came with a lower salary than his last position. At first, I wasn't too worried since I had my own job, but then Mason started pushing me to quit. I might have considered it if his new salary had been enough to support us both, but with his recent job change, his pay was lower. He kept insisting it would go up soon, yet there was no indication of when that might happen. Quitting my job under such uncertain financial circumstances felt risky. We relied on my income to save and covered essential expenses like rent and car payments. Depending solely on Mason's current salary just wasn't practical. One evening, Mason handed me divorce papers, seemingly to intimidate me. "You know I'm ready for this whenever," he challenged. I urged him to take a breath and rethink his words, but he simply stood up and retreated to his room. That confrontation left me reflecting on the hasty decisions and unexpected changes that had occurred since I met Mason. I firmly told him I wouldn't quit my job until his salary improved. At first, he seemed to accept my stance, but the topic kept coming up. Each time he mentioned it, I stood my ground with the same unwavering response. Now, a year into our marriage, Mason's salary still hadn't changed, yet he kept pressuring me to quit my job. "When are you going to leave?" he would ask, and I often felt the urge to respond sarcastically. However, I knew our financial stability hinged on my income. If it was so crucial for me to resign, I believed Mason should focus on advancing his own career instead. As time passed, I began to understand why Mason was so adamant about my leaving work. This became evident during our visits to his parents' house. Whenever we were with his mother, Martha, Mason would feign concern, claiming he wanted to ease her burden. She would express her gratitude, and then he would glance at me pointedly, as if nudging me toward resignation. He suggested she needed help. But Martha was anything but helpless. She was active, healthy, and even held a part-time job that funded her hobbies and social life. It was clear she didn't require my assistance, yet Mason continued to push for my departure. "If only one of us could be home during the day, we could check on Mom every day," Mason said one day, seemingly out of nowhere. It was clear he envisioned me visiting Martha daily, which felt overwhelming and unnecessary. I asked him directly what he expected me to do since Martha was perfectly capable on her own. He listed off mundane tasks like helping with housework and running errands. It was obvious he had plans for how I could contribute, but none of them justified leaving my career. This endless cycle of requests and justifications was exhausting. I needed Mason to realize that while I was willing to support his family when needed, giving up my job without a solid reason was not something I could take lightly. "But Martha has her part-time job and spends most of her days out with friends, right?" I pointed out when he suggested I could take care of housework during the day. His response left me puzzled. Was he really implying I should become his mother's maid? Mason was deeply concerned about maintaining a certain image, especially in front of his parents. If he was so eager to take care of them, why couldn't he handle the household chores himself? Despite his persistent pressure, I stood firm in my decision not to quit my job. I also opted not to visit my in-laws on my days off, though I did make an effort to see them during major holidays like New Year's. As I reflected on our visits, a pattern emerged. Mason frequently delegated tasks to me, asking me to tidy up, assist his mom, or run errands. I pushed back against these requests. When he suggested I go to the store, I would reply, "Don't you know this area better than I do?" His standard excuse was that it wouldn't look right if he did it himself. A rationale I found both puzzling and manipulative. It seemed he was more focused on controlling the situation and projecting an image of family care than on genuinely caring for his parents or me. As time passed, my perception of Mason changed. It became clear that he was more focused on appearances than on genuine affection or respect for me. When I finally confronted him, asking why he didn't help out or even consider quitting his job to care for his mother, his reaction spoke volumes. He looked both disgusted and uncomfortable, replying, "That's not something I'm supposed to do. I'm giving you these instructions so my mom thinks you're a considerate, useful wife. You should appreciate how kind I'm being." His words were revealing. He essentially wanted to shift all the demanding tasks onto me while showcasing his virtue as if it were something extraordinary. But I am neither his servant nor his subordinate, and I certainly didn't deserve to be disrespected in front of my in-laws. It became increasingly clear that Mason's priorities were misaligned, valuing appearances over genuine partnership and support. If he continued with these unreasonable demands, I refused to stay silent. I will stand my ground. Despite our numerous discussions, Mason hasn't changed. He keeps pestering me with the same question. Are you going to quit your job? Furthermore, every time we visit my in-laws, he continues to boss me around as he always has. After reaching my breaking point, I realized it was time for a serious conversation. We need to talk about our future, I said, hoping to guide our discussion towards something constructive. What are you even trying to say? Mason shot back, clearly annoyed. I'm honestly fed up. I'm tired of you constantly asking when I'll quit my job, and I'm exhausted from the pressure to take care of Martha, I expressed, laying out my grievances. Why are you so upset about that? You're my wife, and it's your duty to care for my parents, Mason retorted. Don't you think it's unfair to place that responsibility solely on me? Shouldn't you, as their biological child, the one helping with the housework and caring for them? I challenged, confronting his outdated views. No way, it's the wife's duty to do it. Are you the kind of person who doesn't care about family? Mason accused, clearly upset by my resistance. I'm disappointed to hear you say that, he added. Seizing the moment to highlight the double standard, I asked, then let me ask you this. How have you been caring for my parents? If I asked you to take care of them, would you do it? Mason stared at me blankly, struggling to understand the connection. What are you saying? Why should a husband be responsible for his wife's parents? So does that mean you won't ever take care of my parents? I pressed, aiming to highlight his inconsistency. The husband's parents and the wife's parents are totally different, Mason replied, missing the point entirely. What difference does that make? I don't understand, I said, feeling increasingly frustrated. I didn't realize you were so out of touch. It's like talking to my old boss. What are you trying to say? Mason asked, clearly confused. I'm saying that a husband should take care of his own parents, and you should support your wife's family too, I replied, trying to emphasize the importance of mutual support and equality in our responsibilities. I felt the need to clarify, so I added, so you only prioritize your own blood relatives. I'm really disappointed in you. I won't be visiting your parents anymore. Why would you do that? Enough is enough. I'm the one who wants you to stop this nonsense, he shot back. No way. How did you talk to me like that? My mom is right, Mason exclaimed, his temper flaring. Ha, your mom was talking about you. She said you're a badly behaved husband. That's why she gave me this, he said, pulling a piece of paper from his bag. It was divorce papers. What? You had divorce papers ready? I asked, shocked, but Mason looked oddly proud of himself. See? I scared you, didn't I? I'm ready for this anytime, so think about what you just said, Mason declared smugly before heading to his room. Unbelievable. Why is Mason so selfish? I thought, fuming. That triumphant look on his face made it clear that the divorce papers were just a threat to manipulate me. The fact that Martha was involved only fueled my suspicion. Mason was acting like a puppet for his mom, trying to control me while following her orders. It was ridiculous. I wouldn't let him have his way. How could he not see that our marriage was in serious trouble with this behavior? His lack of understanding only frustrated me further. Mason had already completed the divorce papers and handed them to me with witnesses present, including Martha and his friends. This meant I could sign and file them whenever I wanted. The next day after Mason left for work, I filled out the divorce papers and submitted them to the city office as a precaution. I also filed a notice of non-acceptance of the marriage certificate. Knowing Mason might threaten to file a marriage certificate on his own, I called my parents to explain the situation. When they learned I had prepared the divorce papers, they were initially shocked but quickly rallied behind my decision. Outraged by Mason's behavior, they offered to help me move my belongings right away. Taking a leave from work, I had my parents come over, and together we relocated all my things to their house while Mason was out. I decided to stay with my parents for a while. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely comfortable and at ease in their home. Reflecting on my marriage, it became clear that Mason never contributed his fair share to our household chores. I was the one cooking dinner after long workdays and managing all the cleaning and laundry on my days off. On top of that, he expected me to care for his parents, which simply wasn't feasible. That evening, Mason called, likely just back from work. "Hey, where are you right now?" he asked. "I'm at my parents' house," I replied. "Oh, why would you go back there without my permission? And where's all your stuff? Don't tell me you're staying the night," he questioned, his tone a mix of surprise and selfishness. I almost laughed at how oblivious he was to the seriousness of the situation, thinking I was just staying overnight when I had actually taken most of my belongings with me. "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "What are you talking about? Come back here and make me some food," he demanded. "Make it yourself," I replied, ending the call. I couldn't engage in a conversation about divorce while he continued to be so dismissive. To find some peace, I decided to block his number and wait for him to come to my parents' house. A week later, Mason arrived at my parents' home, accompanied by his parents. They all wore serious expressions as we faced off in the living room, 3 against 3. "How could you do this? How could you leave without my permission?" Mason demanded, incredulity and accusation lacing his voice. "You treated me like a housekeeper, Mason. All I ever asked was for you to take responsibility for your family," I replied, stating my ground. "That's not true. What kind of wife would I be if I didn't take care of Mason?" Martha shot me a fierce glare. My father began to tremble with anger, but I quickly intervened. Mason insisted that I quit my job to care for Martha, claiming it was my duty as his wife. Yet when it comes to my own family, he expects me to manage everything alone. Ultimately, Mason seeks obedience, using me to take care of his parents while taking all the credit. That's why he prioritizes his parents over mine. "Have you ever heard Mason say these things?" I asked. Martha continued to glare, but Lamb looked confused, as if he hadn't known about any of this before. "Let me clear the air," Mason interjected, waving the divorce papers and claiming it was all Martha's idea. "Why would you say that?" Lamb asked, clearly taken aback. "Oh no, it's because Camila has an attitude problem," Martha stammered. "And did you really say that Camila's parents aren't a priority?" I pressed. "Well, it's only natural for your parents to come first," Martha shot back defensively. "Don't be absurd. I came here to support you after hearing about the unfair treatment Camila has faced, but it seems you're the one at fault. Don't hide behind her parents' authority to manipulate the situation," Lamb said, causing Mason to visibly shrink in his seat. Lamb then turned to me and my parents, offering an apology. "I'm truly sorry for the trouble caused by my foolish son. I will have a serious talk with him." "Lamb, you're not to blame at all, so please don't apologize," I replied. "Thank you for your understanding, but there's something else I need to address." I turned to Mason, who now looked nervous. "The divorce papers you gave me? I've already filed them. We're no longer married." Mason and Martha both turned pale. "Why did you file those without my permission?" Mason demanded, his shock evident. "You told me I could file them whenever I wanted. Besides, you filled out your part and had Martha sign as a witness," I calmly explained, leaving Mason momentarily speechless. Seeing the escalating tension, Lamb intervened, furious. "Mason, you used divorce as a threat," he exclaimed, and in a moment of rage, slapped Mason across the face. Martha looked visibly shaken by the scene. Lamb then turned to me and offered a sincere apology. "I sincerely apologize that you had to witness this. You have every right to divorce this fool. On behalf of Mason, I'm truly sorry for the damage done to your marriage," Lamb said, tightening his grip on Mason's collar as he demanded apologies from both him and Martha before ushering them out of the house. Later, I expressed my gratitude to Lamb for his intervention. He reassured me that all of Mason's assets and property would be transferred to me without any complications, considering my higher income and the effort I had invested in managing our household. It was a relief to know I had secured everything from our marriage. I later learned that Lamb had divorced Martha, clearly appalled by her behavior. One day, I bumped into a colleague from Mason's former workplace who had some surprising news. Mason hadn't been performing well at his job and was frequently criticized by his boss. In a fit of defiance, he resigned and switched jobs, which only deepened my frustration with him. Instead of owning up to his shortcomings, he chose to blame others, which likely contributed to his lower pay at the new position. Now, I feel a sense of relief having left him behind. I've rented a cozy apartment and am enjoying my newfound independence. Work is going well, and I'd even received a raise recently. For now, I'm not interested in dating. I prefer to focus on my career. Mason was always more concerned with appearances than with genuine skills. He put on a show at home but never made any real progress in his career. It's unfortunate how some spouses resort to using divorce threats as a way to feel powerful. It's a major misstep. I hope they eventually recognize their mistakes and find happiness on their own. As for me, I'm grateful to have moved on from Mason and look forward to the possibility of meeting someone special when I'm ready.